Hi everyone, welcome to Cartoonology. I hope you're all doing well. Today I want to argue that SpongeBob SquarePants didn't just entertain Generation Z, it fundamentally shaped how an entire generation processes humor through absurdism, irony, and weaponized innocence. These three pillars, which we see throughout the show's best episodes, became the blueprint for meme culture and internet comedy as we know it today. But before we begin, I'd just like to kindly ask you all to subscribe. It's completely free and it really helps us improve the videos for this wonderful community we've managed to build. Anyway, that's enough. Let's begin. Section 1. The Pre-Internet Comedy Laboratory, 1999 to 2003. On May 1st, 1999, something peculiar washed ashore on Nickelodeon. After the Kids' Choice Awards that evening, a 7-minute preview aired for a new cartoon about a talking sea sponge who lived in a pineapple under the ocean. The official premiere came 2.5 months later on July 17th, 1999. Nobody at the time could have predicted that this strange little show about underwater fast food workers would become the most important piece of comedy education for an entire generation. The timing was everything. SpongeBob SquarePants arrived at a specific moment in cultural history that would never exist again. The year 1999 sat at the exact intersection of two worlds. Television still dominated as the primary entertainment medium for children. Kids came home from school, turned on Nickelodeon, and watched whatever aired. There was no streaming, no algorithm deciding what you might like based on your viewing history, no infinite scroll of content. You watched what was on, and millions of other kids watched the exact same thing at the exact same time. But 1999 also marked the early stirrings of internet culture. Home computers were becoming common. Kids were starting to use AOL Instant Messenger. The foundations of what would become meme culture were being laid, even if nobody used that word yet. SpongeBob emerged in this brief window where it could become a universal shared experience through television, while also containing the exact DNA that would allow it to thrive in the coming internet age. The man behind this timing was Steven Hillenberg, and his background explains why SpongeBob worked differently than other cartoons of its era. Hillenberg did not follow a traditional path into animation. He earned a degree in natural resources planning and interpretation from Humboldt State University in 1984, focusing on marine biology. After graduating, he spent 2 years teaching marine biology at the Orange County Marine Institute. While teaching, he created an educational comic book called The Intertidal Zone to help his students understand tide pool animals and ocean ecosystems. Most creators would have kept these two interests separate. Marine biology stays in marine biology. Art stays in art. Hillenberg saw no reason for this division. He left teaching to study animation at the California Institute of the Arts, bringing his ocean knowledge with him. Every character in SpongeBob SquarePants has some connection to actual marine life, filtered through cartoon absurdity. SpongeBob himself started as a natural sponge in early sketches, but Hillenberg switched to a square kitchen sponge because it looked funnier. He almost named the character SpongeBoy, but a mop company already owned that name, so he added the name SquarePants to match what he called the character's square personality. This marine biology foundation mattered more than it seemed. The underwater setting was not just a visual choice. It gave Hillenberg permission to make things weird. In Bikini Bottom, the laws of physics barely existed. Fire could burn underwater. Characters could drown underwater. Water existed within water. Nothing had to make logical sense because it was already happening in an impossible environment. This absurdist foundation would become crucial later. But Hillenberg's other major influence shaped the show even more directly. He loved silent film comedians, especially Laurel and Hardy. He said in multiple interviews that SpongeBob was born from his love of these old comedy shorts. In a 2009 interview with the Washington Post, he explained his philosophy directly. "I think it's amusing to watch a naive, well-meaning character kind of undo more cynical characters, kind of like watching Laurel and Hardy or Charlie Chaplin. I think that's why kids like the show, maybe even why adults like the show, adults who wish they were still kids." This was Hillenberg's core insight. SpongeBob himself was modeled after Stan Laurel, the innocent in the comedy duo, the one who causes chaos not through malice, but through pure, oblivious optimism. Patrick was his dim-witted partner in this chaos. Squidward played the cynical straight man who suffered from their antics. This was not a new formula. Laurel and Hardy had perfected it decades earlier. But Hillenberg understood that this type of character-driven comedy was universal. It worked in 1930. It worked in 1999. It would keep working. The writing staff reinforced this approach. Before SpongeBob, Hillenberg had worked as a director on Rocko's Modern Life, another Nickelodeon cartoon that pushed boundaries. He brought some of that show's staff with him, including writer and voice actor Doug Lawrence, who would voice Plankton. The team understood that they were making a cartoon, yes, but they were making it for everyone. Hillenberg said this explicitly in interviews. Generally, we try not to write down to kids. We really just try to write a visual, character-driven cartoon that has a lot of slapstick and really appeals to us. I guess we are just lucky that other adults find that amusing too. This philosophy created what animator and professor Jason Donati later called a critical bridge in animation history. In the late 1990s, the animation industry was shifting hard toward 3D computer animation. Traditional 2D hand-drawn animation was seen as old-fashioned, expensive, and on its way out. Then SpongeBob premiered, was immediately successful, and stayed committed to 2D animation. Donati argued that without SpongeBob proving 2D could still dominate, shows like Adventure Time and Rick and Morty might never have been made. The entire landscape of television animation could have gone fully 3D. SpongeBob's immediate success was undeniable. From its official premiere onward, it beat Pokémon as the highest-rated and most viewed animated Saturday morning program. It became Nickelodeon's highest-rated show almost immediately, and held that position for years. The network had a massive hit, but more importantly, they had a hit that worked on multiple levels simultaneously. Children loved the physical comedy, SpongeBob running through walls, Patrick doing something impossibly stupid. Explosions, sound effects, bright colors, rapid movement. The show delivered everything a kid wanted from a cartoon. But the dialogue operated on a different frequency. Adults watching with their children noticed jokes that sailed over kids' heads completely. References to other media, Squidward's existential suffering, Mr. Krabs' obsession with money as a parody of capitalism. The show had layers. This multi-generational approach was deliberate. Hillenberg said the show had a kind of time machine that transports parents back to when they watch TV in their footy pajamas. On the other hand, it's very hip in the way it's presented. It is very edgy to adults who know how to read and listen between the frames. The show never winked at its adult audience in an obvious way. It never stopped to make sure they got the joke. Instead, it trusted that different audiences would take different things from the same scene. The first 3 seasons are now universally called the Golden Era by fans and critics. These episodes aired between 1999 and 2003, all under Hillenberg's direct creative control as showrunner. The writing was tighter. The animation improved as the team got better at their craft. The comedic timing sharpened. Episodes from this period, Band Geeks, Pizza Delivery, Graveyard Shift, Shanghaied, Idiot Box, Chocolate with Nuts, Club SpongeBob, are cited over and over as the best the show ever produced. What made these episodes special was their commitment to character-driven chaos. Take Pizza Delivery, one of the earliest classics from Season 1. The entire episode follows SpongeBob and Squidward trying to deliver a single Krusty Krab pizza to a customer far away. That's the whole plot. No villain, no major conflict beyond distance and Squidward's impatience. The episode works because SpongeBob treats this delivery like the most important mission in the world, while Squidward just wants it over. The absurdist peak comes when SpongeBob tries to drive the pizza using only his imagination, actually making a rock move by sheer force of belief. Or consider Shanghaied, where SpongeBob and Patrick get trapped on the Flying Dutchman's ghost ship. They are supposed to help the Dutchman scare people, but they are too stupid to be scary. The episode includes a running gag where SpongeBob says, "You're good, you're good, you're good," while Patrick steers the ship directly through rocks, completely destroying it. The Dutchman watches in horror as his ship gets torn apart, but SpongeBob keeps cheerfully encouraging Patrick's terrible steering. The joke works because nobody learns anything. Patrick does not get better at steering. SpongeBob does not realize the ship is being destroyed. The Dutchman's suffering means nothing to them because they are operating in their own reality. This was the comedy formula. Put innocent characters in situations and let them create chaos through their nature, not through trying to be funny. SpongeBob did not tell jokes. He was the joke, simply by being himself in circumstances where that self caused problems. The show also established its absurdist credentials through visual gags that made no logical sense. In Graveyard Shift, after Squidward tells SpongeBob a scary story about the hash-slinging slasher, strange things start happening. The lights flicker. The phone rings with nobody there. A bus arrives even though buses do not run this late. SpongeBob and Squidward panic, convinced the ghost is real. At the end, after the scare is revealed as just a new employee trying to apply for a job, the show reveals who was actually flickering the lights: Noseratu, the vampire from the 1922 silent horror film. He appears for exactly 3 seconds, flips the light switch, and is never mentioned or explained. This made zero sense in context. It was purely absurdist, a random reference to German expressionist cinema thrown into a kid's cartoon about a talking sponge. This Nosferatu cameo became significant decades later. In 2024, director Robert Eggers released a new remake of Nosferatu. Multiple articles credited SpongeBob with introducing an entire generation to the character, creating interest in the remake among young audiences who otherwise would have no idea what Nosferatu was. A 3-second joke in a 2001 cartoon had lasting cultural impact. The show's approach to humor deliberately avoided what Hillenberg called the elbow-and-rib, tongue-in-cheek aesthetic that dominated American culture, including other kids' shows like Rugrats. SpongeBob never tried to be cool or hip. It never referenced current pop culture in a way that would date it. The humor came from character and situation, not from being of the moment. This gave the show a timeless quality that other cartoons lacked. Hillenberg explained this directly. Our characters act silly, even totally ridiculous at times, and most of our jokes don't come out of pop cultural references. It seems like we're aiming at a child audience, but everyone can laugh at the basic human traits that are funny. It's playful. The humor is playful. The world is playful. You can kind of let go. This letting go was crucial. SpongeBob operated in a world where logic was optional, where a character could have a campfire underwater, where a sea sponge could somehow drown despite living in water, where Patrick kept a bowling ball as a pet rock and nobody questioned it. The show established that in Bikini Bottom, anything could happen. So when absurd things happened, they fit the world perfectly. The educational comic book Hillenberg had created years earlier, The Intertidal Zone, found new life in SpongeBob. Real marine biology facts were sprinkled throughout, but filtered through cartoon impossibility. Actual sponge behavior, being absorbent, flexible, simple organisms, informed SpongeBob's character. Real starfish traits, having no brain, clearly inspired Patrick. But the show never felt educational. It felt like pure entertainment that happened to be made by someone who deeply understood ocean life. By 2003, when the Golden Era's 3rd season ended, SpongeBob had established itself as a cultural force. It was not just popular, it was dominant. Kids quoted it constantly. Adults admitted to watching it alone. The show had generated $13 billion in merchandise sales. It had won multiple Emmy Awards and Annie Awards. More importantly, it had created a specific comedic vocabulary that was about to become incredibly important. Because as the show was establishing its style in the early 2000s, the internet was rapidly evolving. Social media was emerging. YouTube would launch in 2005. Meme culture was beginning to form, and SpongeBob had accidentally created the perfect comedy template for this coming digital age. The show's visual comedy was short and punchy. Reaction faces, exaggerated expressions, physical gags that worked in a single frame. The dialogue had quotable moments that could be isolated from context. The absurdist sensibility meant scenes did not need setup to be funny. You could show someone the Nosferatu light switch moment without any explanation, and it was still bizarre and amusing. More crucially, the show operated on irony without ever announcing it. SpongeBob worked a dead-end fast food job with genuine enthusiasm. This was funny to kids because enthusiastic characters are amusing, but it was funny to adults for a completely different reason. The gap between SpongeBob's joy and the reality of wage labor at a terrible job. The The show allowed both readings simultaneously. It never chose one meaning over the other. This multi-layered approach meant the show could grow with its audience. A 6-year-old watching in 1999 would turn 16 in 2009 and 26 in 2019. At each age, they would understand different jokes, relate to different characters, and find new meaning in episodes they had seen a dozen times. A child identified with SpongeBob's optimism. A teenager related to Patrick's carefree attitude. An adult became Squidward, understanding his frustration in ways that were impossible to grasp at age 6. By the time Steven Hillenberg stepped back from day-to-day production after the 2004 SpongeBob SquarePants movie, which he directed, the foundation was completely established. The show had taught a specific generation how to laugh at absurdity, how to find humor in the gap between innocence and reality, how to use simple characters to express complex feelings. This was not the show's intention. Hillenberg just wanted to make a funny cartoon about a sponge who loved his job. But intention does not matter as much as impact. Those first 3 seasons created a comedy language that millions of children absorbed without realizing they were being educated. They learned that humor could come from character, not punchlines. That random did not have to mean meaningless. That the best comedy often came from putting genuine characters in absurd situations and watching them stay true to themselves. They also learned that children's entertainment could contain hidden depth, that a show could work on multiple levels, that you could re-watch something and discover new meanings. These lessons would become crucial when those same children became teenagers and young adults creating internet content. The show's style, absurdist but earnest, random but character-driven, silly but secretly sophisticated, created a template. Generation Z did not consciously copy SpongeBob when they started creating memes and internet comedy. They simply recreated the humor that had shaped their brains during their most formative years. The show's DNA was already inside them, waiting to express itself in new forms. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. The pre-internet comedy laboratory had run its crucial experiments between 1999 and 2003. The results were now embedded in an entire generation's sense of humor. What came next was watching those results spread across platforms and media that did not even exist when the show premiered. The Absurdist foundation was laid. Now it was time to build on it. Section 2. Pillar 1. Absurdism as native language. The foundation was set. Now came the actual construction of a new comedy style, built on 3 distinct pillars. The first pillar was absurdism, but not the kind found in philosophy textbooks or experimental theater. This was absurdism as a native language, something learned so early and naturally that it became the default mode of humor for millions of children who would grow up to dominate internet culture. Traditional comedy before SpongeBob followed patterns: setup, punchline, cause, effect. Something happens, reaction follows. Even cartoons that aimed for chaos usually followed these basic rules. SpongeBob threw out the rules entirely, not because Hillenberg was trying to be avant-garde, but because he understood something fundamental about how children experience the world. Children do not need explanations for why things are funny. An adult watching a comedy expects the joke to make sense within the logic of the scene. A child laughs when something unexpected happens, period. Hillenberg built his comedy around this principle, creating humor that worked on pure randomness while still being character-driven. The randomness was not empty. It came from who these characters were and how they interacted with their world. The most famous example of this absurdist approach comes from Geeks, the Season 2 episode that most critics and fans consider the best episode the show ever produced. Squidward is trying to form a marching band to perform at the Bubble Bowl. He asks the assembled Bikini Bottom citizens if anyone has played musical instruments before. Patrick raises his hand. Squidward calls on him. Patrick asks, "Is mayonnaise an instrument?" Squidward responds, "No, Patrick, mayonnaise is not an instrument." Patrick raises his hand again. Before he can speak, Squidward adds, Horseradish is not an instrument either. Patrick lowers his hand. This exchange lasts maybe 10 seconds. There is no setup explaining why Patrick would think mayonnaise is an instrument. There is no punchline after Squidward's response. The joke simply exists. Patrick asked an absurd question. Squidward answered it. The scene moved on. But this moment became one of the most quoted lines in the entire series. It spread across the internet as memes evolved. People used it in completely unrelated contexts. The question, "Is mayonnaise an instrument?" became shorthand for asking something obviously stupid while sounding sincere. The humor was not in any clever wordplay or satirical observation. The humor was pure absurdism, someone genuinely wondering if a condiment could be a musical instrument. What made this joke work was Patrick's complete sincerity. He was not trying to be funny. He genuinely wanted to know. His follow-up question about horseradish proved he was operating on some internal logic that made sense to him, even if that logic was incomprehensible to everyone else. This was absurdism rooted in character. Patrick was established as extremely dumb, so asking if mayonnaise was an instrument fit perfectly with who he was. The show deployed this style of humor constantly in its golden era. Idiot Box, a Season 3 episode, built its entire plot around absurdism as a concept. SpongeBob and Patrick order a giant television set. When it arrives, they immediately throw the expensive TV in the trash and play inside the cardboard box it came in. Squidward, watching this, represents the logical adult perspective. He cannot understand why anyone would throw away a new television to play in garbage. The episode's humor comes from SpongeBob and Patrick using only their imagination inside the box, somehow creating completely realistic sound effects that Squidward can hear from outside. They pretend to be in a rocket ship. Squidward hears actual rocket launch noises. They pretend to be mountain climbers. Squidward hears wind and Patrick shouting about shaking hands with Neptune. They pretend to be pirates fighting robots. Squidward hears realistic battle sounds. Squidward becomes obsessed with figuring out how they are creating these sounds. He imagines they must have a tape recorder hidden in the box. When he confronts them, SpongeBob shows his empty hands and says, "We don't have a tape recorder, Squidward." Patrick then holds up a small white box and says, "We have a tape recorder box." This joke operates on multiple layers of absurdism. First, there is no explanation for the realistic sounds. The episode never reveals how they do it because there is no how. Imagination creates real sounds in SpongeBob's world. Second, Patrick's response is perfectly absurd. Of course they don't have a tape recorder. They have a box that used to contain a tape recorder, which is completely different and somehow makes sense in his mind. Third, Squidward's frustration mirrors the audience's logical brain trying to make sense of something that deliberately makes no sense. When SpongeBob explains their philosophy, he says, "Squidward, we don't need television, not as long as we have our imagination." He makes a rainbow appear over his head with his hands as he says the word. Squidward's sarcastic response is, "Wow, I never thought of it that way. That's really something. Can I have your TV?" The episode ends with Squidward going insane, trying to make the box work for him, while SpongeBob and Patrick cheerfully move on to playing another imagination game. The Absurdist lesson is clear. Imagination works for those who believe in it. Trying to logically understand imagination destroys it. This was not a new philosophical concept, but presenting it through a cartoon about a sponge and a starfish playing in trash made it accessible to 6-year-olds. Those 6-year-olds absorbed the lesson without realizing they were learning anything. Randomness can be fun. Imagination does not need to be explained. Logic is optional. Shanghai took absurdism in a different direction. In this episode, SpongeBob, Patrick, and Squidward get trapped on the Flying Dutchman's ghost ship. The Dutchman forces them to be his crew. He assigns Patrick to steering and SpongeBob to finding victims to scare. The steering sequence became legendary for its commitment to absurdist repetition. The Dutchman orders Patrick to steer behind some rocks. Patrick yells, "Moving behind the rocks!" and immediately crashes the ship into the rocks, scraping against them and tearing off pieces of the hull. SpongeBob, standing next to Patrick, encourages him. Keep going, you're good, you're good, you're good. And stop. Don't worry, Captain, we'll buff out those scratches. The ship is completely destroyed. Massive chunks are missing, but SpongeBob maintains his cheerful optimism, assuring the increasingly horrified Flying Dutchman that these catastrophic scratches will buff right out. This pattern repeats throughout the episode. Every time Patrick steers, he crashes into something. Every time, SpongeBob says, "You're good, you're good, you're good," while the ship gets torn apart. The Dutchman watches his vessel being destroyed, powerless to stop it because he already gave Patrick the steering job. The absurdism works through repetition and escalation. The first crash is funny. The second crash is funnier because we know it is coming. By the third and fourth crashes, the joke has transcended its original setup. We are not laughing at Patrick's bad steering anymore. We are laughing at the commitment to the bit, at SpongeBob's unshakable positivity in the face of obvious disaster, at the Dutchman's growing existential horror. When the Dutchman tries to use SpongeBob and Patrick to scare people, they fail completely. He positions them behind a bush and tells them to jump out on his signal. He appears before a little kid and shouts, "Prepare to be burdened with the haunting memory of my ghostly ghost pirates." SpongeBob and Patrick emerge from the bush looking confused. SpongeBob says, "Was that the signal? Okay, sorry, just do it again." The Dutchman, frustrated, turns back to the kid and repeats, "With the haunting memory of my ghostly ghost pirates." SpongeBob and Patrick emerge again. SpongeBob does a little hand trick where he makes two linked circles with his fingers. Patrick, amazed, asks, "How does he do that?" The kid they were supposed to scare says, "Those guys are dorks." The Flying Dutchman responds, "Yes, but they're my dorks." This exchange is absurdist comedy at its purest. SpongeBob and Patrick are too stupid to be scary. They cannot even follow simple instructions to jump out at the right time. When they finally do jump out, they do a children's magic trick instead of being frightening. The joke is not that they failed to be scary. The joke is that they exist in a completely different reality than everyone around them, operating on their own logic that makes perfect sense to them. The show created these absurdist moments through specific techniques that would later translate perfectly to meme culture. One technique was the non sequitur visual gag. In the middle of otherwise normal scenes, something completely random would happen with no explanation. In Shanghai, Patrick needs to see something far away. He says, "I need my glasses," and places two actual glasses full of water over his eyes. The glasses somehow work like binoculars. When he looks through them, his cartoon eyes are briefly replaced by realistic human eyes, staring through the water glasses. This lasts maybe 3 seconds, is never mentioned or explained, and the scene continues as if nothing unusual happened. These visual gags taught viewers that comedy did not need setup or payoff. Something weird could just happen. You could laugh at the weirdness itself. This lesson became fundamental to internet humor, where random visual juxtapositions often carry the entire joke. Another technique was what could be called committed ignorance. Characters remained completely unaware of obvious facts, and their ignorance drove the humor. SpongeBob never realized how stupid Patrick was. Patrick never realized he was stupid. This created a feedback loop of absurdity where both characters reinforced each other's delusions. In Idiot Box, Patrick makes increasingly absurd claims about their imagination games. At one point he shouts, "I am the Lizard King." There is no context for this. They are not playing a lizard game. Nothing in the scene relates to lizards or kings. Patrick simply declares himself the Lizard King, and the episode moves on. This type of random declaration became a signature of the show's humor. Characters would say things that made no sense, deliver the line with complete confidence, and nobody would question it. The absurdity was the joke. The commitment to the absurdity made it funnier. The show also used what could be called escalating calm. characters would react to increasingly insane situations with the same level of mild concern. In Shanghai, as Patrick destroys the entire ship through terrible steering, SpongeBob maintains his encouraging tone throughout. "You're good, you're good, you're good." The ship is literally falling apart around them, but SpongeBob's encouragement never changes. This disconnect between situation and reaction created absurdist humor. Hillenberg explained that this type of comedy came from his love of silent film comedians. Stan Laurel would do something catastrophically stupid while maintaining complete innocence. The humor came from the gap between the disaster occurring and the character's oblivious cheerfulness. SpongeBob and Patrick operated on this exact principle. They caused chaos while remaining genuinely innocent, never understanding the destruction they created. The absurdist style extended to the show's relationship with physics and logic. Fire existed underwater. Characters could drown despite living in water. A squirrel could live in an underwater dome with no explanation of how the dome was built or maintained. Boats drove on the ocean floor. Fish ate at underwater restaurants. None of this made sense, and the show never pretended it did. This created what researchers later called deliberate naivety. The show chose to be naive about its own impossibility. Hillenberg said in interviews, "I think the connection to SpongeBob is that sponges are the most elastic, changing, plastic creatures, and I wanted him to be able to do things that were really magical." By rooting the absurdism in the underwater setting, Hillenberg gave himself permission to ignore all rules. If we accept that a sponge can talk, we can accept anything. This logic-free environment became the perfect playground for random humor. What made this absurdism particularly effective was that it never felt random for the sake of being random. Every absurd moment connected to character. Patrick asking if mayonnaise was an instrument was absurd, but it was also perfectly Patrick. SpongeBob encouraging destructive steering was absurd, but it matched his optimistic character completely. The randomness had an internal consistency based on who these characters were. This character-driven absurdism taught a crucial lesson to its young audience. Randomness works when it comes from a real place. You cannot just throw random elements together and call it comedy. But if you establish characters with specific traits, those characters can do absurd things that feel organic because they match the character's nature. This lesson would become fundamental to meme culture. The best memes are not just random images with random text. The best memes match the image to the emotion or situation perfectly. The absurdity feels right even when it makes no logical sense. SpongeBob taught this instinctively. The show also demonstrated that absurdist humor could exist alongside genuine emotion. Band Geeks is remembered for, "Is mayonnaise an instrument?" But the episode's ending is sincerely emotional. After all the absurd rehearsal scenes, the band actually performs well. Squidward, who spent the whole episode suffering, gets a genuine moment of triumph. The absurdist comedy did not prevent the emotional payoff. Both could exist together. This combination of absurdism and sincerity confused some critics. How could a show be simultaneously silly and meaningful? The answer was that silliness and meaning were not opposites. You could laugh at Patrick's stupidity and also care about Squidward's dreams. The show never made viewers choose between comedy and heart. For the generation growing up with SpongeBob, this became their baseline for humor. Comedy did not need to make sense. Random could be funny. Commitment to a stupid bit was funnier than trying to be clever. Characters being genuinely themselves, even when that self was absurd, created better comedy than characters trying to be funny. These lessons were absorbed unconsciously. A 7-year-old watching Idiot Box in 2002 was not thinking about comedy theory. They were just laughing at SpongeBob and Patrick playing in a box. But the comedy structure was entering their brain anyway, forming neural pathways about what humor could be. When that same 7-year-old turned 17 in 2012, they were posting on early social media, creating and sharing content. The humor they created naturally reflected the comedy that had shaped them. Absurdist memes, random juxtapositions, images that made no sense but felt funny anyway. They were recreating SpongeBob's comedy structure without realizing it. The random equals funny approach that defined much of Gen Z humor has direct roots in these SpongeBob episodes. The idea that you do not need to explain the joke, that commitment to weirdness matters more than cleverness, that sincerity and absurdism can coexist. All of these came from watching a sponge and a starfish destroy a ghost ship while insisting everything was going well. Absurdism became the native language of a generation's humor, and SpongeBob was the teacher. The lessons were taught through mayonnaise instruments, imagination boxes, and terrible ship steering. No tests, no formal instruction, just hundreds of hours of exposure to comedy that operated on its own absurdist logic. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. This was the first pillar, randomness as a valid comedic choice, absurdism rooted in character, logic as optional. These principles became foundational to how an entire generation would create and consume humor. But absurdism alone was not enough. The second pillar would add the crucial element of irony, transforming SpongeBob from a funny kids show into the blueprint for internet comedy. Section 3, Pillar 2, Irony through Squidward's eyes. Absurdism was the first pillar, but absurdism alone creates comedy that is silly without depth. SpongeBob needed a second element to transform from good children's entertainment into something that would resonate across decades and age groups. That element was irony, and it lived in one character more than any other: Squidward Tentacles. Squidward was not the main character. His name was not in the title. He did not get the most screen time or the catchiest songs, but Squidward became the emotional and ironic center of the entire show. He was the character who transformed SpongeBob from a kid's cartoon into a multi-generational phenomenon. Understanding Squidward means understanding why the show worked on completely different levels depending on the viewer's age and life experience. The basic setup was simple. Squidward was SpongeBob's neighbor and co-worker. He worked as a cashier at the Krusty Krab, the underwater fast food restaurant where SpongeBob worked as a fry cook. Squidward hated his job. He hated his boss, Mr. Krabs. He especially hated SpongeBob and Patrick, whose constant cheerfulness and stupidity made his life miserable. Squidward had artistic aspirations. He played clarinet, he painted. He considered himself cultured and sophisticated, surrounded by idiots who could not appreciate his talents. Every episode featuring Squidward followed the same basic pattern. He would try to enjoy his artistic pursuits or find some peace and quiet. SpongeBob and Patrick would interrupt with their chaos. Squidward would suffer. Sometimes Squidward would try to prove his superiority. This would backfire. Squidward would suffer more. The universe consistently punished Squidward for wanting anything better than his current situation. This structure created the irony that defined the show's second pillar. Children watching found Squidward funny because he was grumpy and things went wrong for him. Physical comedy at the expense of the mean character who hated the protagonist. Simple, effective, classic cartoon storytelling. But adults watching saw something completely different. They saw themselves. Squidward worked a dead-end service job with an exploitative boss who cared only about money. His coworker was aggressively cheerful despite working the same terrible job. Squidward had dreams of being a real artist, but he was stuck serving fast food to make rent. His neighbors were loud and inconsiderate. His attempts to improve his situation always failed. He was trapped in a life he never wanted, surrounded by people who did not understand him, with no clear path to escape. This was not children's comedy. This was a brutally accurate depiction of adult life under modern capitalism, filtered through a cartoon about a squid who played clarinet badly. The genius of Squidward's character was that both readings existed simultaneously. Kids laughed at him, adults laughed with him. The show never chose which interpretation was correct, because both were correct. Squidward was funny to kids and relatable to adults in the exact same scenes. The most powerful example of Squidward's dual nature came in Band Geeks, the episode widely considered the best in the series. The plot was straightforward. Squidward got a phone call from his high school rival, Squilliam Fancyson. Squilliam was everything Squidward wanted to be: wealthy, successful, sophisticated, genuinely talented. Squilliam called to brag that his band would be performing at the Bubble Bowl, the underwater equivalent of the Super Bowl. Squidward, desperate to impress his rival, lied and claimed he also had a band that could perform. Squilliam's band canceled, so he offered Squidward the performance slot. Squidward now had 1 week to create a marching band from scratch and perform at the biggest venue in the ocean. He recruited everyone in Bikini Bottom. They were all terrible. Patrick asked if mayonnaise was an instrument. The brass section played off key. The percussion section did not understand how drums worked. When Squidward tried to teach them flag twirling, 2 flag twirlers flew into a blimp and caused it to explode, in a reference to the 1937 Hindenburg disaster. After several days of practice, the band got worse instead of better. On the last day before the performance, they started arguing and fighting. A massive brawl broke out. Everyone blamed each other for their failure. Squidward watched his dream collapse. He stopped the fight and gave a speech. He told them they were terrible. He told them not to come to the Bubble Bowl. He went home completely defeated. The episode showed Squidward alone in his house, having failed once again at the thing he cared about most. For children watching, this was set up for more comedy. For adults watching, this was devastatingly real. How many times had they worked hard on something only to watch it fall apart? How many dreams had they given up on because the reality was too difficult? Squidward's defeat was played for emotion, not laughs. The show took his pain seriously. Then SpongeBob took over. He reminded the other band members that they owed Squidward something. He convinced them to practice one more time, with him conducting instead of Squidward. The episode did not show this practice. It jumped directly to the performance. Squidward arrived at the Bubble Bowl, expecting to cancel the show. Squilliam was waiting for him, wanting to watch him fail. Squidward tried to claim his band died in a marching accident. Then the band appeared behind him in full uniform, instruments ready. He had no choice but to go through with the performance. The band entered the Bubble Bowl, a glass dome that lifted them into a live-action football stadium filled with real human beings. The camera showed the crowd waiting. Squidward raised his baton, expecting disaster. Then they played Sweet Victory, and it was genuinely triumphant. The song was performed perfectly. SpongeBob sang lead vocals. The band executed complex choreography. The crowd cheered. Squilliam was so shocked that he suffered a heart attack and had to be carried away. Squidward jumped for joy, the happiest viewers ever saw him. This ending worked on every level. Children got the happy ending, where the good guys won. Adults got the rare moment of vindication, where hard work actually paid off, where the underdog actually succeeded, where someone like Squidward actually got to experience triumph. The emotional impact came from how rarely this happened to Squidward in other episodes. Band Geeks became legendary not just for its comedy, but for giving Squidward this one perfect moment. Fans cited it as proof that the show had genuine heart beneath the absurdism. The Sweet Victory song became so culturally significant that after Steven Hillenberg died in 2018, over 1 million people signed a petition asking the NFL to play it during Super Bowl 53 as a tribute. The NFL refused, offering only a brief 3-second clip of Squidward introducing another performer. Fans were furious at this disrespect. The cultural response demonstrated how deeply people cared about Squidward's triumph in that episode. It was not just a funny cartoon moment. It represented something important about perseverance and deserving recognition. But Band Geeks was the exception. Most episodes did not give Squidward victory. Most episodes showed him suffering, and that suffering created the ironic commentary that defined the show's second pillar. Consider Squidward's daily life. He woke up every morning in his Easter Island head house, which sat between SpongeBob's pineapple and Patrick's rock. He could not escape his neighbors, even at home. He dragged himself to work at the Krusty Krab, where he stood at a cash register for hours, serving customers who were often rude or stupid. His boss paid him poorly and constantly prioritized profit over employee well-being. His coworker SpongeBob loved every minute of this job, which made Squidward's misery worse by contrast. After work, Squidward would try to relax by playing clarinet. He was terrible at clarinet, but he believed he was good. Nobody appreciated his music. In fact, most characters found it painful to listen to. But Squidward kept playing because it was his only creative outlet. This routine repeated constantly. Squidward was stuck in a loop of work, dissatisfaction, failed artistic expression, and harassment from his neighbors. He never improved his situation. He never escaped. The irony was that Squidward's life was objectively terrible, but the show presented it as normal and permanent. For children, this was background to the funny adventures. For adults, this was their life. The dead-end job with no prospects, the artistic dreams that went nowhere, the neighbor who somehow remained cheerful despite working the same terrible job, making you feel worse about your own misery. The inability to escape your circumstances despite constant effort. Squidward became the most relatable character in the show because he represented the gap between who we wanted to be and who we actually were. He wanted to be a sophisticated artist. He was a fast food cashier. He wanted to be appreciated for his talents. He was ignored or mocked. He wanted peace and quiet. He lived next to the loudest people in the ocean. This gap between aspiration and reality created irony on multiple levels. There was the obvious irony that Squidward's artistic pretensions exceeded his actual talent. But there was deeper irony in the fact that even if Squidward was talented, it would not matter. The world was not set up to reward artistic merit. The world rewarded people like Squilliam, who were born into success. People like Squidward worked at the Krusty Krab forever. The show never explicitly stated this commentary. It never had characters discuss capitalism or class struggle. It simply showed Squidward's reality and let viewers draw their own conclusions. Kids saw a grumpy character getting what he deserved. Adults saw a crushing depiction of how life actually worked. As viewers aged, their relationship with Squidward changed dramatically. This evolution became one of the most discussed aspects of the show's cultural impact. Almost everyone who grew up watching SpongeBob reported the same experience. They started by identifying with SpongeBob and ended by identifying with Squidward. A 6-year-old watching in 1999 related to SpongeBob's optimism and excitement. Life was full of possibilities. Work seemed fun if you had the right attitude. The child wanted to be like SpongeBob, happy, enthusiastic, loved by everyone. That same person at 16 related to Patrick, carefree, not worrying about the future, enjoying the present moment without much thought. By 26, they had become Squidward. They understood his frustration with annoying coworkers. They felt his exhaustion with meaningless work. They shared his desire for quiet and recognition. They finally understood why Squidward hated SpongeBob's constant cheerfulness, because that cheerfulness felt like a denial of how hard life actually was. This progression happened to enough people that it became a common topic in articles, social media posts, and Reddit discussions about the show. We all became Squidward became a shared generational realization. The character who seemed like the villain in childhood became the hero in adulthood. This shift demonstrated the ironic sophistication built into the show's structure. Hillenberg and his writers created a character that children would dislike and adults would relate to, knowing that today's children would become tomorrow's adults. Squidward was a time-delayed joke that only landed after years of real-world experience. The irony extended to specific episodes that gained new meaning when viewed as adults. In Squid on Strike, Squidward convinced SpongeBob to go on strike against Mr. Krabs for better working conditions. To children, this was a silly episode about SpongeBob not understanding how strikes worked. To adults, this was about labor organizing, worker exploitation, and how bosses manipulated employees into accepting terrible conditions. In Procrastination, SpongeBob struggled to write an 800-word essay for boating school, getting distracted and anxious instead of working. Children found this relatable as a school experience. College students and adults found it devastatingly accurate as a depiction of anxiety and executive dysfunction. These episodes worked as light entertainment, but also functioned as social commentary. The show never announced this commentary. It trusted viewers to find the meaning that resonated with their own experiences. Squidward memes became some of the most popular SpongeBob memes, precisely because of this ironic relatability. The Squidward window meme showed Squidward looking out his window with various expressions: excited, disappointed, angry, sad. The meme format captured conflicting emotions, wanting to be social, but also wanting to be alone, being excited about plans, then immediately regretting them, watching neighbors with judgment, but also curiosity. This meme worked because it expressed something genuinely complex about human psychology. We contain contradictions. We want things and also do not want them. Squidward's window became a perfect visual representation of this internal conflict. Other Squidward memes focused on his suffering in ways that were darkly humorous. Squidward getting hit by things, Squidward's face during moments of existential despair, Squidward realizing something terrible was about to happen. These were not triumphant memes. They were memes about shared misery, about finding humor in how consistently life went wrong. This type of ironic, self-deprecating humor became characteristic of Gen Z comedy, making fun of your own struggles, laughing at how bad things were, finding community through shared suffering. Squidward provided the template for this approach. He suffered constantly, but he kept going. His suffering was funny because it was so relatable. We all felt like Squidward sometimes, and seeing it animated made it more bearable. The irony pillar also demonstrated how comedy could contain genuine critique without losing its entertainment value. SpongeBob never stopped being funny when it was commenting on worker exploitation through Squidward. Kids still laughed at the physical gags. Adults still laughed, but also thought about what they were seeing. This multi-layered approach influenced how Gen Z created their own content. Memes could be funny and also make a point about society. Jokes could be ironic without being mean. You could laugh at suffering while acknowledging the suffering was real. Squidward taught that irony worked best when grounded in authentic emotion. He was not ironically detached from his suffering. He genuinely hated his life and wanted better. The irony came from the gap between his desires and reality, not from him pretending not to care. This authentic foundation made the irony land harder. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. The second pillar was complete. Absurdism provided the comedy structure. Irony provided the emotional depth. Together, they created humor that worked for all ages, while meaning different things to different viewers. But there was still one more pillar needed to complete the structure. One more element that would make SpongeBob the perfect template for internet humor. That final pillar was the weaponization of innocence itself. Section 4, Pillar 3, Innocence as Commentary. Absurdism provided the structure, irony provided the depth, but the third pillar was the most sophisticated and the most influential for how humor would evolve in the internet age. This was the weaponization of innocence itself, the use of genuine, childlike optimism as a lens that revealed uncomfortable truths about the world it inhabited. SpongeBob SquarePants loved his job. This simple fact was the foundation of the show's entire premise, and also its most devastating piece of social commentary. Every morning, SpongeBob woke up excited to go to work. He literally had an alarm clock labeled "To the Krusty Krab" that played foghorn sounds. He would leap out of bed, get dressed in his SquarePants, feed his pet snail Gary, and run with genuine joy toward his workplace. His workplace was the Krusty Krab, a fast food restaurant. His job was making Krabby Patties, underwater hamburgers. His boss was Mr. Krabs, a crustacean whose entire personality revolved around making money. His coworker was Squidward, who hated every minute of being there. SpongeBob worked this job for minimum wage in terrible conditions with no benefits, no advancement opportunities, and constant exploitation from his employer, and he absolutely loved it. To a child watching in 1999, this made perfect sense. SpongeBob was the hero. Heroes were supposed to be happy and enthusiastic. Work was just a setting where adventures happened. The Krusty Krab was a fun place where SpongeBob made delicious food and had silly encounters with customers. His enthusiasm was simply part of his character, the optimistic protagonist doing protagonist things. But to an adult watching, especially an adult who had worked any kind of service job, SpongeBob's enthusiasm became deeply unsettling. It revealed the exploitation at the center of the show's world through the simple act of contrasting SpongeBob's attitude with the reality of his situation. Mr. Krabs was not a subtle character. He explicitly cared only about money. His first name was literally Eugene, but everyone called him by his species name and his defining trait, Mr. Krabs, the crab who loved money. The show made jokes about this constantly. Mr. Krabs would risk his employees' lives for an extra penny. He charged SpongeBob for breathing. He once faked his own death for sympathy money. In one episode, he tried to steal a penny that had been surgically placed in someone's body. Hillenberg based Mr. Krabs on a real person, a restaurant owner he worked for during his teenage years. In interviews, Hillenberg said the owner reminded him of a pirate with his strong Maine accent, so he gave Mr. Krabs the pirate aesthetic. But Hillenberg also admitted he added the cheap part to give him more personality. This cheap part was not a minor character trait. It was the character's entire motivation. Mr. Krabs ran the Krusty Krab using every exploitative practice familiar to anyone who had worked food service. He paid his employees poorly. The show never stated exact wages, but multiple episodes referenced how little SpongeBob and Squidward earned. In some episodes, Mr. Krabs suggested they should pay him for the privilege of working there. He provided no benefits, no paid time off, no sick days. When business was slow, he made them do unnecessary work rather than send them home. When business was busy, he refused to hire additional help because it cost money. The Krusty Krab itself was barely maintained. The kitchen equipment was old and broken. The dining area was basic. Mr. Krabs refused to spend money on improvements because that cut into his profits. He hoarded his money in a vault in his office, literally swimming through piles of cash while his employees worked in deteriorating conditions. This was not exaggeration. This was how many actual fast food restaurants operated. The show took real exploitation and made it visible through cartoon logic. Mr. Krabs said out loud what real bosses only implied. He turned employee exploitation into his explicit philosophy, rather than hiding it behind corporate language about team players and family. And SpongeBob loved working for him. This was where Innocence became commentary. SpongeBob's genuine enthusiasm existed in direct contrast to the objective awfulness of his situation. He was not being ironic. He was not in denial. He genuinely believed that working at the Krusty Krab was the best job in the world. He had wanted this job since childhood. When he finally got hired in the series' first episode, he cried tears of joy. His dream was to flip burgers for minimum wage for a boss who saw him as a tool for profit. The show never asked viewers to see this as sad. It presented SpongeBob's joy as real and valid. But by placing that joy in this context, it created a split-screen effect. Children saw the joy and related to wanting to be good at something you cared about. Adults saw the context and recognized the tragedy of someone being exploited while believing they were living their dream. This technique, using innocent enthusiasm to highlight systemic problems, became foundational to how Gen Z would later use children's show imagery for social critique. The meme format of pairing cheerful cartoon characters with captions about depression, economic anxiety, or existential dread came directly from this template. SpongeBob taught that innocence placed in the wrong context revealed truth more effectively than direct criticism. The show demonstrated this principle through specific plot points that seemed innocent but contained sharp observation. SpongeBob repeatedly won Employee of the Month at the Krusty Krab. The Employee of the Month picture hung on a wall, showing the same employee winning month after month after month. At one point, the show revealed that SpongeBob had won Employee of the Month 374 consecutive times. To SpongeBob, this was validation. He treasured these awards. He worked harder to earn them. The Employee of the Month recognition proved his value and justified his love for his job. But Employee of the Month awards were a known corporate manipulation tactic. They cost nothing to give. They provided no actual benefit, no raise, no promotion, no improved working conditions. They simply made employees feel recognized while keeping them in the same position, doing the same work for the same low pay. The company got increased productivity from the employee's desire to win again. The employee got a picture on a wall. SpongeBob winning 374 times meant he had worked at the Krusty Krab for over 30 years of consecutive months at the time that fact was revealed. 30 years of being the best employee, and he was still a fry cook making the same wage. His loyalty and exceptional performance earned him nothing except more Employee of the Month plaques. The show never pointed this out directly. It let SpongeBob celebrate his awards with genuine pride, but adults watching understood exactly what was happening. They had worked for companies that used the same tactic. They had been the Employee of the Month who never got promoted. SpongeBob's innocent pride in his achievements made the exploitation more visible, not less. The Krusty Krab's business model also revealed capitalism's absurdity through innocent presentation. Mr. Krabs hoarded enormous wealth while paying his employees poverty wages. His competitor, Plankton, ran the chum bucket across the street. The chum bucket had no customers because its food was terrible. This should have meant Mr. Krabs could charge higher prices or invest in his business. Instead, he squeezed every penny from his employees and customers while sitting on piles of unused money. This made no sense from a business perspective. Mr. Krabs' greed was self-defeating, but it made perfect sense as commentary on actual corporate behavior. Real companies hoarded profits while claiming they could not afford to pay workers better. Real bosses extracted maximum value from employees while taking enormous compensation themselves. The show just made it visible through a cartoon crab who literally swam through money while his employees struggled. SpongeBob's innocent acceptance of this system highlighted its cruelty. He never asked for raises. He never complained about working conditions. He never organized with Squidward for better treatment. When Squidward tried to start a strike in the Squid on Strike episode, SpongeBob did not understand what a strike was. He thought it was a fun game where they destroyed the restaurant. His innocence made him the perfect employee from Mr. Krabs' perspective and the perfect victim from a critical perspective. He would never demand better because he could not conceive that better was possible. His dream was already achieved. He worked at the Krusty Krab. That was enough. This dynamic revealed how systems of exploitation depended on workers accepting their conditions as natural and unchangeable. If SpongeBob realized he was being exploited, he might demand change. But his innocence protected the system by making him grateful for the opportunity to be exploited. The show let viewers see this clearly without ever stating it explicitly. Patrick provided a counterpoint that made this commentary even sharper. Patrick did not work. He lived under a rock and had no job, no income, no participation in the economic system. The show never explained how Patrick afforded food or anything else. He simply existed outside capitalism entirely. And Patrick was happy. He was not smarter than SpongeBob. He was significantly dumber. But he had one thing SpongeBob lacked: complete freedom from employment. Patrick spent his days doing whatever he wanted. He played games, he slept, he wandered around. He had no boss, no schedule, no obligations. His best friend worked all day, but when SpongeBob finished work, Patrick was always available to hang out because Patrick's time was entirely his own. The show never presented Patrick as morally superior for not working. He was too stupid to work, not too principled. But his existence as a character created an implicit comparison. SpongeBob worked constantly for a terrible boss and loved it. Patrick did nothing and was equally happy. Which one had made the better choice? Children saw Patrick as silly and lazy. Adults saw Patrick as having accidentally achieved what they all wanted: freedom from wage labor. Patrick's Rock was not just a home. It was a rejection of participation in an exploitative system. He was happier than Squidward, who worked and hated it. He was as happy as SpongeBob, who worked and loved it. But Patrick's happiness cost him nothing. The show also explored innocence as commentary through SpongeBob's treatment by the world around him. Despite his exceptional performance, enthusiasm, and loyalty, SpongeBob never got promoted. In multiple episodes, he tried to advance to other positions. Every attempt failed, usually through some external factor rather than his own inadequacy. In one episode, he tried to become manager. Krabs promoted Squidward instead, explicitly because SpongeBob was just a kid, despite being the better employee. The show coded SpongeBob as childlike, and this childlikeness disqualified him from advancement, even when he excelled at his current position. His innocence became a barrier to success in a system that rewarded cynicism and adult presentation over actual competence. This pattern reflected real workplace dynamics, where the best workers often were not promoted because they were too valuable in their current positions. Why make your best fry cook a manager when you needed him making perfect Krabby Patties? SpongeBob's reward for being excellent was staying exactly where he was forever. His innocence prevented him from recognizing this trap. He kept believing that if he worked hard enough, success would follow. The show kept proving him wrong, while never breaking his faith. This created a loop where SpongeBob's optimism was both admirable and tragic. Admirable because he maintained hope. Tragic because that hope was systematically betrayed. The show's approach to innocence became particularly influential because it never turned mean. It would have been easy to make SpongeBob's optimism the butt of the joke, to mock him for being naive and stupid. Instead, the show treated his innocence with genuine affection. SpongeBob was the hero. His optimism was real and valid. The world's failure to reward that optimism was the problem, not SpongeBob himself. This distinction mattered enormously for how the show's lessons translated to later comedy. Gen Z humor often featured nihilism and darkness, but it rarely attacked hope itself. Instead, it attacked systems that crushed hope. SpongeBob modeled this approach. Love the innocent character, critique the world that exploits their innocence. Hillenberg's philosophy reinforced this reading. He said repeatedly in interviews, "The rule is, follow the innocence." He also stated, "SpongeBob is a complete innocent, not an idiot. SpongeBob never fully realizes how stupid Patrick is. They're whipping themselves up into situations. That's always where the humor comes from." SpongeBob's innocence was deliberate and central. Hillenberg wanted to create a character who embodied optimism without cynicism, who believed the best about people and situations, even when evidence suggested otherwise. This innocence was not ignorance. SpongeBob was competent at his job. He solved problems. He helped friends. He succeeded at tasks. His innocence was about attitude, not ability. But placing this innocent character in a world filled with exploitation, corporate greed, and systemic unfairness created automatic critique. SpongeBob highlighted what was wrong with Bikini Bottom by being right himself. His goodness revealed everyone else's corruption. His enthusiasm for a terrible job revealed how terrible the job actually was. This technique of using innocence as a critical lens influenced an entire generation's approach to social commentary. The internet became filled with memes that paired children's show characters with adult problems. Images from SpongeBob, Arthur, Sesame Street, or other childhood programs appeared with captions about student debt, wage stagnation, housing crises, or political corruption. These memes worked because they used the same technique as SpongeBob, placing innocence in a context that revealed truth through contrast. A children's character should not have to think about these problems. The fact that we associated them with these problems anyway showed how universal and inescapable those problems had become. SpongeBob taught this method through hundreds of episodes, showing an innocent character navigating a flawed world. The show never had SpongeBob give speeches about workers' rights or economic justice. It simply showed him living his life with genuine optimism while surrounded by exploitation. The contrast did all the work. The show also demonstrated that innocence could coexist with awareness in ways that created complex emotion. SpongeBob sometimes showed that he understood his situation more than he let on. In rare moments, his optimism faltered. In the episode Karate Choppers, Mr. Krabs threatened to fire SpongeBob for practicing karate during work. SpongeBob's devastation at potentially losing his job revealed how much his identity depended on being a Krusty Krab employee. This dependency was itself a form of tragedy. SpongeBob had tied his entire self-worth to a job that did not value him beyond his productivity. His innocence was so complete that he could not imagine life without this exploitative relationship. The episode played this for drama, showing SpongeBob's genuine distress. For a moment, the show dropped the comedy and showed the dark side of his innocent devotion. These moments were rare but crucial. They proved that SpongeBob's innocence was not stupidity. He could feel pain. He could recognize unfairness. But he chose optimism anyway. This made his character more powerful as commentary. He was not naive about the world. He simply refused to let the world's unfairness destroy his hope. This distinction between naivety and chosen optimism became important for how the character influenced later culture. SpongeBob memes often featured him in states of distress or exhaustion, showing that even eternal optimism had limits. The "tired SpongeBob" meme showed him looking exhausted after work. These memes acknowledged that maintaining optimism in a cruel world was difficult labor, not natural innocence. The show never explicitly made these statements. It trusted viewers to understand through observation. This respect for audience intelligence was part of what made the show work across age groups. Children took the story at face value. Adults read the subtext. Both interpretations were valid and intentional. The weaponization of innocence as commentary reached its peak when combined with the first two pillars. Absurdism provided the comedy structure. Irony provided the emotional resonance. Innocence provided the critical lens. Together, these three elements created a show that could be watched as pure entertainment or as sophisticated social critique, depending on what the viewer brought to it. This three-pillar structure became the blueprint for internet humor. Memes combined absurdist randomness with ironic distance and innocent imagery to create commentary that was simultaneously funny and meaningful. You could laugh at the surface level while also recognizing the deeper observation about how the world actually worked. SpongeBob did not invent any of these techniques individually. Absurdist comedy existed long before. Irony was ancient. Using innocence for critique was a known literary device, but SpongeBob combined all three in a specific way at a specific cultural moment, reaching a specific generation at the exact right time in their development. That generation absorbed these lessons unconsciously while watching a cartoon about a talking sponge who loved his exploitative fast food job. They learned that innocence could be powerful, that optimism could be radical, that genuine enthusiasm in the face of systems designed to crush it was both admirable and heartbreaking. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. The three pillars were complete. The foundation was built. What remained was watching how this structure translated from television to the internet, from cartoon episodes to meme culture, from passive entertainment to active creation. The blueprint was finished. Now it was time to see what would be built from it. Section 5. The meme translation. From screen to internet. The three pillars existed in television format from 1999 to the early 2000s. Then the internet evolved, and everything changed. SpongeBob SquarePants did not just survive this transition from television to digital culture. The show thrived in ways that seemed almost impossible to predict. A cartoon made before YouTube existed became the single most dominant source of meme content for an entire generation. This was not an accident. The show's specific qualities made it the perfect template for internet humor. The timing was crucial again. SpongeBob's golden era ran from 1999 to 2003. YouTube launched in 2005. Facebook opened to the general public in 2006. Twitter started in 2006. Reddit gained mainstream attention in the late 2000s. Instagram launched in 2010. Tumblr became culturally significant around 2010. TikTok arrived in 2016. Each platform created new ways to share visual content, and SpongeBob content dominated on every single one. The generation that grew up watching SpongeBob hit their teenage and young adult years just as these platforms were becoming central to social life. A person who was 7 years old when SpongeBob premiered in 1999 turned 15 in 2007, right when social media was exploding. That same person turned 23 in 2015, when meme culture had become a primary mode of communication online. They carried SpongeBob with them through every stage of internet evolution. But other cartoons from the same era did not achieve the same meme dominance. Rugrats aired on Nickelodeon. The Powerpuff Girls was popular. Dexter's Laboratory had a following. These shows had fans, created some memes, and maintained nostalgia. But none of them became a meme factory on the scale of SpongeBob. Understanding why requires examining what made SpongeBob uniquely suited for meme adaptation. The first quality was visual versatility. SpongeBob episodes contained an enormous variety of facial expressions and character poses. The animation style allowed for extreme exaggeration. Characters' faces could stretch, distort, and transform in ways that captured precise emotions. SpongeBob crying looked different from SpongeBob panicking, which looked different from SpongeBob confused, which looked different from SpongeBob excited. Each expression was distinct and immediately readable. This mattered for meme creation because memes rely heavily on visual communication. A good meme image instantly conveys an emotion or situation without requiring explanation. SpongeBob provided hundreds of perfect reaction images because the animators had designed every frame to communicate clearly. The mocking SpongeBob meme demonstrated this perfectly. The image came from the Season 9 episode Little Yellow Book, which aired in 2013. In the scene, Squidward read SpongeBob's diary and discovered that SpongeBob acted like a chicken whenever he saw Plaid. The episode showed SpongeBob transformed into a chicken-like posture, hunched over with his hands positioned like claws and his face scrunched in an absurd expression. This single image became one of the most used memes of the 2010s. The format was simple. The image appeared with text in alternating capital and lowercase letters, like, "This is sarcastic." The alternating caps indicated mockery or ridicule, and the chicken SpongeBob image provided the visual representation of that mocking tone. The meme spread across every platform. Twitter users deployed it in arguments. Facebook groups used it to mock opposing viewpoints. Reddit communities adopted it as shorthand for dismissing bad arguments. Instagram accounts built entire pages around variations of the format. The meme even entered spoken language, with people using the alternating cap pattern in text messages without the image, because everyone understood the reference. Why did this particular image work so well? The expression captured a specific emotion, contemptuous mockery, with perfect clarity. The absurdity of SpongeBob as a chicken added humor that undercut the meanness of mockery. You could use it to mock someone without being genuinely cruel, because the image itself was so ridiculous. The meme let people express sarcasm and dismissal while maintaining some playfulness. This was classic SpongeBob translation. The show had created an absurd image for its own narrative purposes. Internet users extracted that image and repurposed it for entirely different communication needs. The image worked in its new context because it clearly expressed something people wanted to express but lacked good words for. Other SpongeBob reaction images served similar functions. Surprised Patrick showed Patrick with his mouth wide open in shock. This became the standard way to react to unexpected information online. Squidward looking out the window captured complicated emotions about social interaction, wanting to join, but also wanting to stay isolated. Tired SpongeBob showed him exhausted after work, becoming the universal image for burnout and exhaustion. Each image filled a specific emotional or communicative need. The show had created a library of perfectly calibrated visual expressions, and meme culture rated that library for whatever it needed. The number of usable images seemed endless because the show had run for hundreds of episodes across multiple animation styles, providing variations on every possible emotion. The second quality that made SpongeBob perfect for memes was quotability. The show's dialogue was written to be memorable. Simple phrases delivered with specific inflections. Is mayonnaise an instrument? I'm ready. I'm ready. The inner machinations of my mind are an enigma. Firmly grasp it. We should take Bikini Bottom and push it somewhere else. These lines stuck in viewers' minds because they were short, punchy, and delivered in ways that made them easy to repeat. Quotability mattered for early internet culture, which was heavily text-based. Before memes became primarily visual, internet humor relied on people typing memorable phrases in forums and comment sections. SpongeBob provided an enormous vocabulary of phrases that everyone recognized. You could type, "Is mayonnaise an instrument?" in any online space, and people would immediately understand you were making a SpongeBob reference and signaling a particular type of absurdist humor. This shared vocabulary created community. Recognizing a SpongeBob quote meant you were part of the group that watched the show. Using SpongeBob quotes was a way to identify others who shared your cultural background. The more obscure the reference, the stronger the connection when someone else got it. This social function made SpongeBob quotes valuable currency in online spaces. The third quality was contextless versatility. SpongeBob memes worked even if you had never seen the episode they came from. You did not need to know that the mocking SpongeBob image came from a diary reading episode about plaid triggering chicken behavior. The image worked on its own. This was true for almost every SpongeBob meme format. Compare this to memes from shows with heavy continuity or complex plots. Understanding those memes required knowing the original context, but SpongeBob episodes were largely self-contained, and the emotions expressed were universal. Anyone could understand what surprised Patrick meant. Anyone could relate to tired SpongeBob. The memes were accessible to people who had never watched the show, which allowed them to spread beyond the original fan base. The fourth quality was nostalgic universality. SpongeBob was not just popular, it was nearly universal for people born between roughly 1990 and 2010. This was one of the last true monoculture experiences. Everyone watched it. This meant SpongeBob memes had the largest possible audience. When you posted a SpongeBob meme, you could be confident that the vast majority of people in your age group would recognize it. This universality gave SpongeBob memes an advantage over other nostalgic content. Not everyone watched Rugrats. Not everyone saw the Powerpuff Girls. But everyone saw SpongeBob. It was always on. It dominated Nickelodeon's schedule. Parents put it on to keep kids occupied. Teenagers watched it after school. College students streamed it as comfort viewing. The exposure was so complete that SpongeBob became a shared language for an entire generation. The research data supported this dominance. Multiple articles noted that SpongeBob memes were everywhere across all platforms. One analysis stated that there were thousands, if not millions, of SpongeBob memes across the internet. A teaching professor at Northeastern University, Jason Donati, said in 2024, "There's now a generation that would recognize SpongeBob at a higher rate than Mickey Mouse." SpongeBob had surpassed Mickey Mouse, one of the most iconic characters in entertainment history, in terms of cultural recognition among younger generations. This was not just popularity. This was cultural saturation at a level few properties ever achieved. The meme formats that emerged from SpongeBob demonstrated how the three pillars translated to internet culture. Absurdist memes used SpongeBob's random humor directly. The imagination rainbow meme came from Idiot Box, where SpongeBob created a rainbow with his hands while saying the word imagination. This became a way to dismiss something as fake or unlikely. That's not real, it's just imagination. The absurdist origin of the scene made it perfect for absurdist internet humor. Ironic memes used Squidward and situations that highlighted the gap between expectation and reality. Images of Squidward suffering at work became standard representations of employment misery. The Krusty Krab itself became a meme location representing terrible jobs. Me at the Krusty Krab at 3 a.m. with an image of exhausted SpongeBob captured the reality of service work in a way that was both funny and genuinely relatable. Innocent commentary memes used SpongeBob himself to highlight modern problems through contrast. Cheerful images of SpongeBob paired with dark captions about debt, depression, or political despair. The comedy came from the disconnect. This happy children's character should not be thinking about these adult problems. But we all were. So projecting those problems onto SpongeBob images made them more bearable. These meme categories mapped directly to the three pillars. The show had taught absurdism, irony, and weaponized innocence. Meme creators reproduced these exact techniques using the show's own imagery. They were not inventing new humor styles. They were applying the lessons SpongeBob had already taught them. The statistics on specific meme impacts were staggering. After the brief Noseratu clip in Graveyard Shift, director Robert Eggers credited SpongeBob with introducing Gen Z to the character when discussing interest in his 2024 Nosferatu remake. One 3-second joke in 2001 had measurable cultural impact 23 years later. The Sweet Victory song from band Geeks demonstrated meme power in the physical world. After Steven Hillenberg died in November 2018, fans created a petition asking the NFL to play Sweet Victory during the Super Bowl 53 halftime show as a tribute. The petition received over 1.1 million signatures. This was not a joke petition. Over 1 million people genuinely wanted a song from a cartoon to play during the most watched television event in America. The NFL acknowledged the petition and included a brief 3-second clip of Squidward introducing Travis Scott during the February 2019 halftime show. Fans were furious at this minimal acknowledgement. The backlash was immediate and intense across social media. People felt genuinely betrayed that the NFL had not honored Hillenberg properly. But the response to the controversy demonstrated the meme's power. On-demand streams of Sweet Victory increased by 566% after the Super Bowl, jumping from 46,000 streams on February 1st to 2nd to 310,000 on February 3rd to 4th. Anger over insufficient SpongeBob tribute drove hundreds of thousands of people to stream a song from a 2001 cartoon episode. The cultural weight of this content was undeniable. SpongeBob memes also demonstrated remarkable longevity compared to other internet trends. The research noted that most internet trends lasted about 2 weeks. TikTok trends would dominate for days, everyone would use them, then they would vanish. New slang emerged and disappeared in cycles. But SpongeBob memes never went away. The FreakBob meme surfaced in 2023, 24 years after the show premiered. This meme showed a distorted version of SpongeBob on a phone call and became extremely popular across social media. New SpongeBob meme formats were still being created and going viral decades into the show's run. Compare this to other nostalgic properties. People occasionally made memes about other childhood shows, but those memes came and went. SpongeBob memes were constant. Every month brought new SpongeBob meme formats, or fresh applications of old formats to current events. The show never stopped being relevant to internet humor. Part of this longevity came from the show's timeless quality. Hillenberg had deliberately avoided pop culture references that would date the content. The humor came from character and situation, not from referencing things that would only make sense in 1999. This meant SpongeBob content never felt old. An episode from 2001 was just as funny and just as applicable to current situations as newer content. The show's continued production also helped. New episodes meant new material for memes, though fans generally agreed that the Golden Era episodes provided the best meme content. Still, the fact that SpongeBob was an active, ongoing show, rather than a finished relic, kept it in cultural circulation. But the deeper reason for longevity was that SpongeBob had successfully embedded itself in how an entire generation thought about humor. The show was not just content they consumed, it was the foundation of their comedic language. You could remove every SpongeBob meme from the internet, and people would still create new ones, because SpongeBob's comedy structure lived inside their minds. The three pillars had become internalized. When Gen Z creators made absurdist content, they were following patterns learned from SpongeBob. When they made ironic commentary on modern life, they used techniques SpongeBob had demonstrated. When they paired innocent imagery with dark themes, they were repeating the weapon the show had given them. This meant SpongeBob memes were not really about SpongeBob anymore. They were about a generation using familiar imagery to express their own experiences. The character was the vessel, but the content was their own lives. SpongeBob provided the language, and they wrote their own stories in that language. The translation from screen to internet was complete. A television show created before social media existed had become the dominant visual vocabulary for social media communication. The specific qualities that made SpongeBob good television, visual clarity, quotable dialogue, contextless versatility, universal appeal, were the exact qualities that made good memes. Hillenberg could not have predicted this. He was making a cartoon about a sponge who loved his fast food job. But by building that cartoon on three solid pillars of absurdism, irony, and weaponized innocence, he created something that could adapt to any medium and survive any cultural shift. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. The meme translation proved that the structure was sound. The blueprint worked. Now the question was whether specific episodes demonstrated the full power of this structure better than others. And for that, there was no better example than examining the single most beloved episode in the entire series. The one that combined all three pillars into perfect television and became a cultural phenomenon that outlasted almost every other piece of internet content from its era. Section 6. Why Band Geeks Changed Everything. Every rule has its perfect demonstration. Every theory needs its ideal example. For SpongeBob SquarePants, that example was Band Geeks. This single 11-minute episode from Season 2 combined all three pillars, absurdism, irony, and weaponized innocence, into what critics, fans, and even the show's own cast members consider the greatest episode of the entire series. Understanding why Band Geeks worked so perfectly explains why SpongeBob became the blueprint for a generation's sense of humor. The episode aired on September 7th, 2001, 6 days before the September 11th attacks that would change American culture permanently. This timing was coincidental, but somehow fitting. Band Geeks represented a moment of pure comedic achievement right before the world got significantly darker. The episode's themes of triumph against the odds and finding joy through community would resonate even more strongly in the years that followed. The plot was simple. Squidward received a phone call from his high school rival, Squilliam Fancyson. This was Squilliam's first appearance in the series, and the character was perfectly designed as Squidward's opposite. Where Squidward was a struggling cashier, Squilliam was wealthy and successful. Where Squidward claimed to be sophisticated, but lived in a modest Easter Island head, Squilliam actually owned mansions and lived a life of luxury. Where Squidward desperately wanted recognition for his artistic talent, Squilliam had already achieved fame. The phone conversation established this dynamic immediately. Squilliam asked, "I hear you're playing the cash register now." Squidward, defensive, responded, "Sometimes." Then he tried to insult Squilliam back. How's the unibrow?" Squilliam's response crushed him. It's big and valuable. Even Squidward's insults backfired. Squilliam turned everything into evidence of his own success. He called to inform Squidward that his band would be performing at the Bubble Bowl next week. This was clearly meant to make Squidward feel inferior. And it worked. But then Squilliam mentioned that his own band could not make it to the performance. He asked if Squidward's band could fill in. Squidward, desperate to impress his rival, lied instantly. He claimed he had a band and they could definitely perform. Squilliam accepted this, clearly excited to watch Squidward fail publicly at the biggest venue in the ocean. This setup demonstrated the show's understanding of character-driven comedy. The plot emerged naturally from who Squidward was: insecure, pretentious, desperate for validation. He created his own problem by lying to impress someone he hated. The audience immediately understood his motivation, even while recognizing he was making a terrible mistake. Squidward now had 1 week to create a marching band from nothing and perform at the Bubble Bowl. He created recruitment posters and distributed them around Bikini Bottom. The posters promised, "Looking to add fulfillment to your dull life? Then become part of the greatest musical sensation ever to hit Bikini Bottom and be forever adored by thousands of people you don't know. Not to mention free refreshments." Everyone in Bikini Bottom showed up, not because they cared about music, but because their lives were dull and they wanted free food. This was the first layer of commentary. These characters had nothing better to do than join a marching band for the promise of free snacks. Their lives were empty enough that this seemed like a good opportunity. The first rehearsal introduced the Absurdist pillar. Squidward asked how many people had played musical instruments before. Patrick raised his hand. Squidward called on him. Patrick asked, "Is mayonnaise an instrument?" Squidward, already exhausted, "No, Patrick, mayonnaise is not an instrument." Patrick raised his hand again. Before Patrick could speak, Squidward added, "Horseradish is not an instrument either." Patrick lowered his hand. This exchange lasted 10 seconds and became one of the most quoted moments in the entire series. The absurdism was pure and character-driven. Patrick genuinely wondered if condiments could be instruments. He operated on logic that made sense only to him. Squidward's preemptive answer about horseradish showed he understood Patrick well enough to know another condiment question was coming. The rehearsal continued with more absurdist chaos. Squidward tried to teach them basic music. When he asked the percussion section to play, SpongeBob and the other drummers misunderstood and blew on their drumsticks like they were wind instruments. The drumsticks flew out of their mouths and pinned Squidward to the wall. His response? "Too bad that didn't kill me." This joke combined absurdism with Squidward's ironic suffering. The physical comedy was absurd. Drumsticks do not work like blow darts. But Squidward's wish for death was the ironic element. He was already so miserable that being impaled by drumsticks seemed preferable to continuing this rehearsal. The next rehearsal day showed SpongeBob asking, "Is this the part where we start kicking?" He thought marching band meant a chorus line. Patrick, hearing the word kicking, immediately kicked Sandy in the leg. Sandy beat him up in response. When Patrick returned from the fight, his body was stuck inside a trombone with his head sticking out of the bell. As he walked, the trombone made musical notes with each step. This was visual absurdism at its peak. The show provided no explanation for how Patrick's body fit inside the trombone, or why it made musical sounds when he walked. The image was funny purely because it was impossible and strange. The rehearsals got worse each day. Squidward tried to have them play loudly. The sound waves were so powerful, they blew Squidward's face backward. He tried to have them play softly. A massive fight broke out instead. Band members used their instruments as weapons. Mr. Krabs and another character charged at each other with clarinets like jousting knights. Sandy destroyed someone's xylophone with a drumstick. The entire rehearsal dissolved into violence. Squidward watched his dream collapse. He stopped the fight and told them honestly, "I've had it with your nonsense. You people don't have a shred of musical talent." He ordered them not to come to the Bubble Bowl and went home defeated. This moment was crucial for the episode's emotional structure. The absurdist comedy stopped. Squidward's ironic suffering became real suffering. The show took his pain seriously. It showed him alone in his house, having failed at the thing he cared about most. This was not played for laughs. This was genuine pathos. Then the innocence pillar activated through SpongeBob. After Squidward left, SpongeBob addressed the other band members. He said, "What kind of monsters are we? That poor creature came to us in his hour of need, and we failed him. Squidward's always been there for us when it was convenient for him." He then tried to give examples of Squidward helping people. He asked one character, "Evelyn, when your little Jimmy was trapped in a fire, who rescued him?" Evelyn responded, "A fireman." SpongeBob asked another, "And Larry, when your heart gave out from all those tanning pills, who revived you?" Larry answered, "Some guy in an ambulance." SpongeBob, undeterred, "Right, so if we all could just pretend that Squidward was a fireman, or some guy in an ambulance, then I'm sure we could all pull together and discover what it truly means to be in a marching band." Another character shouted, "Yeah, for the fireman! This!" Speech was perfectly absurd. SpongeBob's examples proved that Squidward had never actually helped anyone. But SpongeBob still convinced everyone to try again by asking them to pretend Squidward was someone who had helped them. The logic made no sense. The emotion was genuine. SpongeBob's innocent faith that they could succeed motivated everyone, despite the complete lack of rational justification. The episode then jumped to the performance. It did not show them practicing. It went directly to Squidward arriving at the Bubble Bowl, expecting to cancel. Squilliam was waiting for him at the entrance, eager to witness the failure. Squidward tried to lie. "My band died in a marching accident." The band immediately appeared behind him in full uniform with their instruments ready. He had no choice but to perform. They entered the Bubble Bowl, a glass dome that elevated them into a live-action football stadium filled with real human beings. The show switched to live-action footage of an actual stadium crowd. This visual choice emphasized the stakes. These were not cartoon characters in a cartoon stadium. This was the real world watching. Squidward raised his baton, expecting disaster. Then they played Sweet Victory. The song was performed by David Glenn Isley, a professional rock vocalist, not Tom Kenny doing the SpongeBob voice. This was a real power ballad, performed without irony. The band executed the song perfectly. SpongeBob sang lead vocals. The choreography was complex and flawless. The crowd cheered. Confetti fell. Squilliam watched in shock, then suffered a heart attack and was carried away on a stretcher. Squidward jumped for joy. The episode ended with him experiencing pure happiness, the only time in the entire series where his triumph was complete and unqualified. This ending worked on every level simultaneously. For children, the good guys won. The band succeeded through teamwork and determination. The moral was clear and satisfying. For adults, this was a rare moment of vindication in a cruel world. Squidward actually got what he deserved. His talent was recognized. His rival was defeated. The system actually rewarded his effort for once. This almost never happened in real life, which made it deeply cathartic to watch in a cartoon. The absurdist pillar was present in the journey. Mayonnaise instruments, trombone bodies, speeches about pretending Squidward was a fireman. The ironic pillar was present in Squidward's suffering and the gap between his dreams and reality. The innocent pillar was present in SpongeBob's faith that they could succeed despite all evidence to the contrary. And all three pillars led to a genuinely earned emotional payoff. The episode was hilarious and meaningful simultaneously. It never sacrificed one for the other. The cultural impact was immediate and lasting. According to cast member Bill Fagerback, who voiced Patrick, Band Geeks was his favorite episode. Tom Kenny, SpongeBob's voice actor, said the same on a DVD collection dedicated to his favorite episodes. Multiple critics ranked it as the #1 SpongeBob episode ever made. During the UK SpongeBob's Top 100 event in 2012, Band Geeks was voted #1. The song Sweet Victory became more than just a cartoon moment. It was released on the SpongeBob SquarePants soundtrack album called The Yellow Album on November 15th, 2005. The song went from being unknown production music to surpassing 300,000 iTunes downloads in 1 year purely from its exposure in this episode. When Steven Hillenberg died from ALS on November 26, 2018, fans immediately knew how to honor him. They created a Change.org petition asking the NFL to play Sweet Victory during the Super Bowl 53 halftime show on February 3, 2019. The petition received over 1.1 million signatures. Think about that number. Over 1 million people signed a petition asking for a song from a 2001 cartoon episode to play during the most watched television event in America. This was not a joke. People genuinely believed this was the appropriate tribute. The song represented something important to them about triumph, community, and refusing to give up. The NFL acknowledged the petition. The Mercedes-Benz Stadium, hosting the Super Bowl, posted a scene from Band Geeks on their official Twitter account. Maroon 5, the halftime show performers, released a teaser video featuring SpongeBob clips. Speculation built that they would actually play the song. Then the halftime show happened. A 3-second clip of Squidward appeared, introducing Travis Scott as a true musical genius who needs no introduction. The song did not play. Fans felt betrayed. The backlash was intense. Social media filled with angry responses. CBS News reported that the response was mixed, noting both the criticism and SpongeBob's official Twitter account's positive reaction. But the fan anger was real and widespread. Despite the controversy, on-demand streams of Sweet Victory increased by 566% after the Super Bowl. The song jumped from 46,000 streams on February 1st to 2nd to 310,000 streams on February 3rd to 4th. People who felt the NFL had disrespected Hillenberg's memory streamed the song hundreds of thousands of times in protest. 2 years later, the Super Bowl 55 commercial for Paramount Plus featured the Sweet Victory clip as various Viacom CBS characters climbed Paramount Mountain. This was seen as the NFL finally giving SpongeBob fans what they wanted, though it came too late for many. Band Geeks had transcended being a good episode. It had become cultural shorthand for believing in something against the odds. The song represented hope that maybe, sometimes, things could work out, that maybe the good guys could win, that maybe the universe could reward effort and faith instead of crushing them. This was why Band Geeks changed everything. It proved that SpongeBob could deliver genuine emotional satisfaction while maintaining its absurdist comedy foundation. It showed that all 3 pillars working together created something more powerful than any one pillar alone. It demonstrated that children's entertainment could achieve real artistic merit without condescending to its audience. Most importantly, it gave a generation a shared moment of joy that stayed with them into adulthood. People remembered where they were when they first saw Band Geeks. They remembered how it made them feel. They wanted that feeling honored when Hillenberg died because the episode had meant something real to them. The 3 pillars had their perfect expression in 11 minutes of television. Absurdism through mayonnaise instruments and trombone bodies. Irony through Squidward's suffering and desperate lies. Innocence through SpongeBob's faith in success despite obvious failure. All leading to genuine triumph. This was the blueprint in its purest form. This was how comedy could be silly and meaningful. How a show about talking sea creatures could express real human emotions. How innocence and absurdism and irony could combine into something that resonated for decades. Band Geeks changed everything because it proved the structure worked. The foundation was sound, the blueprint was complete, and a generation absorbed this lesson and carried it forward into how they would create their own comedy in the internet age that was just beginning. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. But Band Geeks was not an accident or an outlier. It was the natural result of a specific creative formula that defined the show's first 3 seasons and then disappeared when that formula changed. Section 7. The Golden Age Formula. Band Geeks was not a miracle. It was the result of a specific creative formula operating at peak efficiency. That formula existed during SpongeBob's first 3 seasons, from 1999 to 2003, producing what fans and critics universally call the Golden Age or Golden Era of the series. Understanding what made this period special requires examining what elements combined to create consistent excellence and what happened when those elements changed. The Golden Age had clear boundaries. Season 1 aired from May 1999 to April 2000. Season 2 ran from October 2000 to July 2003. Season 3 aired from October 2001 to October 2004. The first SpongeBob SquarePants movie was released in November 2004. Steven Hillenberg directed the movie and originally intended it to be the series finale. After the movie, Hillenberg stepped back from day-to-day showrunning, though he remained credited as executive producer. This transition marked the end of the Golden Age. The show continued producing episodes. Many of those episodes were good. Some were excellent, but the consistent quality and specific comedic style that defined the first 3 seasons changed. Fans noticed immediately. The debate about post-movie SpongeBob versus pre-movie SpongeBob became one of the most discussed topics in the fan community. The first element of the Golden Age formula was Hillenberg's direct creative control. As showrunner for the first 3 seasons and the movie, Hillenberg was involved in every aspect of production. He oversaw the writing. He worked with storyboard artists. He made final decisions on character choices and comedic timing. His vision shaped every episode. Hillenberg brought specific priorities to this role. He insisted on character-driven comedy over pop culture references. He demanded that the humor come from who these characters were, not from making jokes about current events or celebrities. This timeless approach meant Golden Age episodes never felt dated. An episode from 2001 was just as funny in 2025 because it did not rely on references that only made sense in 2001. He also maintained what he called following the innocence. SpongeBob's optimistic nature was sacred. The show could put him in difficult situations, but it could not break his fundamental character. This consistency meant SpongeBob remained recognizable and reliable as a protagonist. Viewers knew who he was and trusted the show to keep him that way. When Hillenberg stepped back, he chose Paul Tibbitt to take over as showrunner. Tibbitt had worked on the show since the beginning as a writer, storyboard artist, and director. He understood SpongeBob deeply. Hillenberg trusted him completely. But Tibbitt had a different creative sensibility, and the show naturally evolved to reflect his vision instead of Hillenberg's. The change was not immediate or catastrophic. Season 4, which began airing in May 2005, still contains strong episodes, but fans noticed differences in tone and humor style. The slapstick became more extreme. Characters acted meaner to each other. SpongeBob sometimes became more annoying than endearing. Squidward's suffering increased, but felt less earned. The balance that made the Golden Age work had shifted. The second element of the Golden Age formula was animation quality improvements. The show's animation evolved significantly across the first 3 seasons. Season 1 had a rougher, more hand-drawn aesthetic. Lines were less clean, character movements were simpler. But this gave the animation a specific charm. It felt handmade and organic. By Season 2, the animation had tightened considerably. Character movements became more fluid. Facial expressions grew more varied and extreme. The animators had learned what worked for these characters and refined their approach. This improvement continued into Season 3, which many fans consider the visual peak of the series. These animation improvements enhanced the comedy. Better facial expressions meant more precise emotion communication. More fluid movement meant physical comedy could be more elaborate. The animators could execute more complex gags while maintaining visual clarity. Band Geeks, Chocolate with Nuts, Club SpongeBob. These episodes used advanced animation techniques that were not possible in Season 1. After the movie, the animation style changed again. It became cleaner and more digitally polished. Some fans preferred this newer style. Others felt it lost the hand-drawn warmth of the Golden Age. The shift was noticeable enough that episodes could often be dated by their animation style alone. The third element was writing tightness. Golden Age episodes were 11 minutes long, but felt complete. Every scene served the story. No moment was wasted. The pacing was precise, building from setup through complications to resolution, without dragging or rushing. Consider Pizza Delivery from Season 1. The entire episode was SpongeBob and Squidward delivering one pizza. That was the whole plot. But the episode contained multiple comedic sequences. SpongeBob trying to drive using imagination, getting lost in the wilderness, dealing with the cruel customer who refused the pizza for not having a drink. Each sequence built on the previous one. The comedy escalated naturally. The emotional payoff when Squidward finally stood up for SpongeBob felt earned despite the simple premise. Or examine Chocolate with Nuts from Season 3. SpongeBob and Patrick tried to sell chocolate bars door to door to become fancy. Every house they visited introduced a new, absurd character or situation. The chocolate-obsessed customer who chased them, the con artist who sold them candy bar bag-carrying bags, the old ladies who wanted them to buy all their chocolate. Each sequence was distinct, but connected to the overall goal. The episode never felt repetitive, despite using the same basic structure repeatedly. This tight writing required discipline. The writing staff had to resist the temptation to include every funny idea. They had to choose which jokes served the story and which were just funny in isolation. Golden Age episodes felt focused because they were focused. Every element connected to a clear comedic or emotional objective. Post-movie episodes sometimes lost this discipline. Jokes ran longer without adding value. Scenes existed because they were funny rather than because they advanced the story. The pacing occasionally dragged or felt uneven. The episodes were still entertaining, but they lacked the structural precision of the Golden Age. The fourth element was character consistency. In the Golden Age, characters had clear traits that remained stable. SpongeBob was naive but competent. Patrick was stupid but innocent. Squidward was pretentious and suffered for it. Mr. Krabs was cheap. Sandy was tough and smart. These traits drove their behavior predictably, which created comedy when they interacted. Later seasons sometimes violated this consistency. SpongeBob became genuinely stupid instead of just naive. Patrick became cruelly manipulative instead of just dumb. Squidward became a victim of random torture instead of suffering consequences of his own actions. Mr. Krabs' cheapness went from funny to disturbing. These changes made the characters less reliable as comedic foundations. The character inconsistency debate was contentious among fans. Some argued the characters needed to evolve to keep the show fresh. Others insisted that violating core character traits broke what made SpongeBob work. Both positions had merit, but the Golden Age's character stability was undeniable. The fifth element was a specific balance between absurdism, irony, and innocence. The three pillars existed in careful proportion. The absurdism was weird, but not incomprehensible. The irony was present, but not overwhelming. The innocence was genuine, but not saccharine. This balance created comedy that worked on multiple levels without becoming chaotic or depressing. Post-movie seasons sometimes pushed too hard on one pillar at the expense of others. Some episodes were purely absurdist without emotional grounding. Others were darkly ironic without the innocence to offset the cynicism. The balance that made Band Geeks perfect became harder to maintain. The debate about Golden Age versus later seasons became one of the most persistent discussions in SpongeBob fandom. Defenders of later seasons pointed out that seasons 4 to 9 contained many excellent episodes. They argued that nostalgia biased people toward the episodes they watched as children. They noted that Hillenberg himself disputed the idea that he left the show, saying in a 2012 interview that he still watched over production and remained involved. Critics of later seasons compiled lists of what they saw as declined quality. They pointed to specific episodes that violated character consistency or relied on gross-out humor instead of clever comedy. They noted that memes from the Golden Age dominated internet culture, while later episodes produced fewer lasting memes. The research supported the existence of distinct eras. One article noted that examining the different eras of the show has birthed different types of memes. The original Hillenberg era has memes that are generally upbeat in nature, along with having the most dedicated fans. The Tibbet era has a lot of memes as well, mostly since it was going on when the fan base was still young enough to watch it daily. This suggested the Golden Age had a specific comedic identity that translated to specific meme styles. Later eras had different identities that produced different memes. Neither was objectively better, but they were recognizably different. The Golden Age formula was not secret or mysterious. It was simply the result of a specific creative team with a specific vision working at the peak of their collaborative power. Hillenberg's leadership provided consistency. The animation team's improvement enabled better visual comedy. The writing staff's discipline created tight storytelling. Character consistency made the comedy predictable in the best way, and the balance between the three pillars prevented any one element from overwhelming the others. When Hillenberg stepped back, this exact combination of elements could not be replicated. Tibbet was talented and brought his own strengths, but he was not Hillenberg. The team changed over time. New writers brought new sensibilities. The animation style evolved. The characters developed in new directions. The show continued and found new success, but it was no longer operating on the Golden Age formula. This was not failure. This was natural evolution. No creative project maintains the exact same identity forever. Teams change, visions shift. What worked in 1999 might not work in 2009. The show adapted to survive, and its continued popularity proved that adaptation was successful. But the Golden Age remained the standard against which everything else was measured. When people said SpongeBob, they usually meant Golden Age SpongeBob. When memes used SpongeBob images, they predominantly used Golden Age episodes. When critics ranked the best episodes, Golden Age episodes dominated the lists. The formula had worked so perfectly during those first 3 seasons that it became definitive. It established what SpongeBob could be at its absolute best. It demonstrated how the 3 pillars could combine into consistent excellence. It proved that children's television could achieve genuine artistic merit while remaining accessible and entertaining. And crucially, it shaped an entire generation's sense of humor during their most formative years. The children watching Golden Age SpongeBob from ages 5 to 12 were absorbing this formula as their baseline for comedy. They learned timing, character consistency, how absurdism worked, how irony functioned, how innocence could be powerful. These lessons came from Golden Age episodes specifically because those were the episodes dominating Nickelodeon's schedule during those crucial years. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. But the Golden Age formula alone does not fully explain SpongeBob's cultural dominance. The show needed one more crucial element to become the blueprint for Gen Z humor. It needed to speak to multiple generations simultaneously while meaning different things to each of them. This multi-generational architecture was not an accident. It was engineered into the show's structure from the very beginning. Section 8. Multigenerational comedy architecture. The Golden Age formula created consistency, but consistency alone does not explain why adults watched a children's cartoon voluntarily. SpongeBob succeeded across age groups because it was specifically designed to work on multiple levels simultaneously. This was not a happy accident. Hillenberg and his team engineered the show's architecture to deliver completely different experiences depending on the viewer's age and life experience. The basic principle was simple, but required careful execution. Children needed physical comedy, bright colors, simple conflicts, and clear resolutions. Adults needed dialogue-based humor, subtle observations about life, complex emotional situations, and layered meaning. The show had to provide both experiences in the same 11 minutes without sacrificing either one. Hillenberg explained this approach directly in interviews. He told the Los Angeles Times, "On one hand, it's a kind of time machine that transports parents back to when they watched TV in their footy pajamas. On the other hand, it's very hip in the way it's presented. It is very edgy to adults who know how to read and listen between the frames." This quote revealed the dual strategy. Adults would experience nostalgia for their own childhood television watching, but the show also gave them adult-oriented humor hidden between the frames, in the dialogue, the subtext, the implications that children would miss completely. The architecture worked through several specific techniques. The first was the physical versus dialogue split. Physical comedy played at the surface level for children. A character running through a wall, explosions, exaggerated facial expressions, pratfalls. These required no context or sophisticated understanding. They were immediately funny through visual impact alone. But while the physical comedy happened, characters were having conversations that operated on a different frequency. The dialogue contained observations about work, relationships, social dynamics, and existential questions that only adults would recognize as commentary. Consider the episode Squid on Strike. The surface plot was simple. Mr. Krabs was being cheap, so Squidward convinced SpongeBob to go on strike. They picketed outside the Krusty Krab with signs. Eventually, Mr. Krabs agreed to talk. The conflict resolved. Physical comedy throughout, picket signs, silly chants, SpongeBob not understanding how strikes worked. But the dialogue and situations were about labor organizing. Squidward tried to rally workers against an exploitative employer. Mr. Krabs used classic union-busting tactics, dismissing their complaints and trying to wait them out. When the strike finally ended, Mr. Krabs made Squidward and SpongeBob pay for damages to the restaurant during the strike, effectively punishing them for organizing. The resolution was not a victory for workers, but a demonstration of how power dynamics favored employers. Children saw silly characters with signs saying silly things. Adults saw a surprisingly accurate depiction of labor disputes and why strikes often failed. Both audiences were entertained, but they were watching fundamentally different shows. The second technique was tonal layering. The show maintained an upbeat, energetic tone at the surface. Music was bouncy, colors were bright. Character voices were high-pitched and enthusiastic. This tone signaled to children that they were watching a fun, safe cartoon where nothing too bad would happen. But underneath this cheerful tone, the show explored genuinely dark themes: isolation, failure, unfulfilled dreams, economic anxiety, existential meaninglessness. These themes existed in the story content while the tone remained cheerful, creating a dissonance that children did not notice, but adults found either funny or unsettling. Squidward in Clarinetland from Season 7 demonstrated this technique, though it fell outside the Golden Age. Squidward found himself trapped in a surreal dimension where reality broke down. The episode was genuinely unsettling, using horror imagery and psychological distortion, but it was presented with the same bright colors and upbeat music as every other episode. Children watched it as a weird adventure. Adults watched it as a depiction of psychological breakdown. Even Golden Age episodes used this technique, just more subtly. Rock Bottom from Season 1 trapped SpongeBob in a dark, strange part of the ocean, where he could not communicate with anyone and could not find a way home. The episode captured the anxiety of being lost in an unfamiliar place where normal social rules did not apply. The tone stayed relatively light, but the emotional content was genuinely anxious. Children found it spooky, but fun. Adults recognized the feeling of being completely out of place and unable to get help. The third technique was character complexity. Characters were designed to be simple enough for children to understand, but complex enough for adults to find interesting. SpongeBob was optimistic and enthusiastic on the surface. Children related to his energy and excitement, but adults noticed his desperation for validation, his need to be liked, his inability to recognize when people found him annoying. He was a more complicated character than he initially appeared. Squidward was the clearest example of this layering. Children saw a grumpy character who was mean to SpongeBob and deserved the bad things that happened to him. This was simple villain logic. The mean character gets punished. Children laughed at his suffering because he was not nice. Adults saw a person trapped in circumstances beyond his control, surrounded by people he had not chosen, stuck in a job he hated, unable to achieve his dreams despite genuine effort. His meanness was an understandable defense mechanism against a world that consistently denied him what he wanted. His suffering was not karmic justice, but systemic oppression. Adults related to Squidward because they were Squidward, or feared becoming him. This complexity meant the show could explore real emotional situations while maintaining its identity as a children's cartoon. A child watched Band Geeks and saw Squidward being mean, then learning to work with others, then succeeding through teamwork. Simple moral lesson about cooperation. An adult watched Band Geeks and saw a desperate person lying to impress someone he hated, failing at his dream, experiencing genuine despair, then getting an unearned triumph that felt cathartic precisely because life never actually worked at that way. Complex emotional journey about the gap between aspiration and reality. Both readings were valid, both were intentional. The show was designed to support both interpretations simultaneously. The fourth technique was reference sophistication. The show included references that operated at different levels of accessibility. Some references were broad enough that children and adults would recognize them equally. These were usually visual gags or parodies of common story types. Everyone understood when SpongeBob and Patrick acted like superheroes, because everyone knew what superheroes were. But other references required specific cultural knowledge that children lacked. The Noseratu cameo at the end of Graveyard Shift meant nothing to kids watching in 2001. They saw a weird vampire character flipping a light switch. Funny because it was random and unexpected. Adults, especially adults familiar with film history, recognized Count Orlok from the 1922 German expressionist horror film. The reference was absurdist because it made no sense in context, but it was also sophisticated. The show was referencing silent cinema in a children's cartoon. This demonstrated respect for the adult audience's intelligence and cultural knowledge. Hillenberg's background in animation school exposed him to film history. His mentor, Jules Engel, was an experimental animator who emphasized art history and classical influences. Hillenberg absorbed this education and embedded it into SpongeBob. The show referenced Laurel and Hardy's comedy style constantly. It included visual nods to classic animation techniques. It used compositional choices that came from studying how great cartoons were constructed. Children received entertainment. Adults received education in comedy history, though most probably did not consciously recognize what they were learning. They just noticed that SpongeBob felt different from other cartoons, felt more carefully constructed, felt like it respected their intelligence. The fifth technique was rewatchability through changing perspective. This was perhaps the most important element of the multi-generational architecture. The show was designed to be watched multiple times across different life stages, revealing new meaning each time. A person watching at age 7 understood certain jokes. That same person watching at age 15 understood different jokes in the same episode. At age 25, they understood yet more jokes they had missed before. The episode had not changed. The viewer had changed, and the episode revealed different layers as the viewer aged. This was not accidental. Hillenberg said explicitly, "Generally, we try not to write down to kids. We really just try to write a visual, character-driven cartoon that has a lot of slapstick and really appeals to us. I guess we are just lucky that other adults find that amusing too." He was not writing for kids. He was writing for himself and his adult writing staff, then trusting that kids would enjoy the surface level while adults got everything. This approach required confidence that you could make something adults found funny that kids would also find funny for different reasons. Research confirmed this rewatching phenomenon. One article stated, "People who loved the show as children can come back and understand jokes they had missed the first time around, and thus gain a better appreciation for the show's writing and comedy. This created a unique relationship between audience and show. SpongeBob grew with you. It was not a childhood memory you outgrew. It was a text that matured as you matured, revealing more complexity the more life experience you brought to it. This kept the show relevant across the viewer's entire life. The rewatching experience became a common discussion topic online. People posted about jokes they finally understood years later. They shared realizations about character motivations they had missed as children. They expressed appreciation for the writing sophistication that had gone over their heads originally. This ongoing discovery process created deeper engagement than a show that revealed everything on first viewing. SpongeBob rewarded attention and rewatching. It had depth that took time to fully appreciate. This depth kept people coming back and kept the show in active cultural circulation, rather than becoming a nostalgic relic. The multi-generational architecture also solved a practical problem. Parents needed to watch television with their young children. If the show only appealed to children, parents would tolerate it at best, resent it at worst. But if the show gave parents genuine entertainment, they would actively choose to watch with their kids. This increased viewership and created positive associations for the entire family. Nickelodeon understood this value. The network marketed SpongeBob as a show the whole family could enjoy together. This was not empty marketing language. The show actually delivered on that promise through its multi-layered construction. The architecture's success influenced how later children's shows were created. After SpongeBob proved multi-generational appeal was possible and profitable, other shows attempted similar approaches. Adventure Time, Regular Show, Gravity Falls. These shows all targeted kids, but included sophisticated humor and complex themes that appealed to adults. Hillenberg had not invented this approach. Looney Tunes cartoons from the 1940s and 1950s included adult humor and cultural references that children missed. The Simpsons in the 1990s demonstrated that animated shows could work for all ages. But SpongeBob was the bridge that brought this approach into the 2000s and proved it could work for cable children's programming specifically. The multi-generational architecture was fundamental to why SpongeBob became the blueprint for Gen Z humor. The generation grew up watching a show that taught them comedy could work on multiple levels. They learned that something could be silly and sophisticated simultaneously. They internalized the idea that humor did not need to choose between accessibility and depth. When this generation started creating their own content, they naturally replicated this multi-layered approach. Memes worked on surface level and deeper level. Jokes had obvious meaning and hidden meaning. Content could be enjoyed casually or analyzed extensively. This was the SpongeBob model applied to internet content creation. The architecture demonstrated that respecting your audience's intelligence did not mean losing accessibility. You could make something everyone enjoyed, while giving extra rewards to people who looked closer. This became standard practice in internet humor, where memes often contained layers of meaning that required different levels of cultural knowledge to fully appreciate. SpongeBob proved that children's entertainment could be art, that cartoons could contain genuine sophisticated while remaining cartoons, that you did not need to choose between entertaining kids and satisfying adults. The architecture made all of this possible through careful design and disciplined execution. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. But the multi-generational architecture needed one more crucial element to complete its effectiveness. It needed to educate its audience in cultural references and comedy history they otherwise would never encounter. And this education happened through specific choices about what to reference and how to present those references to young viewers who had no context for what they were seeing. Section 9. The Noseratu Effect. Teaching cultural literacy. The multi-generational architecture allowed SpongeBob to work for all ages. But that architecture served another crucial function that nobody planned or expected. The show became a cultural education program, teaching millions of children about comedy history, film references, and artistic traditions they had no other way to encounter. This education happened invisibly, through jokes and images that children found funny without understanding their origins. The clearest example was the Noseratu moment from Graveyard Shift. This 3-second joke became one of the most discussed references in the entire series, and demonstrated how SpongeBob functioned as cultural bridge between generations. The episode aired on September 6, 2001, as the first half of a double feature with Krusty Love. The plot was straightforward. Mr. Krabs decided the Krusty Krab should stay open 24 hours to make more money. SpongeBob was excited about working the night shift. Squidward was not. During the night shift, Squidward decided to scare SpongeBob by making up a ghost story. He invented the hash-slinging slasher, a former fry cook who cut off his own hand and replaced it with a rusty spatula. According to the story, the slasher died when a bus ran him over. Now his ghost returned every Tuesday night to haunt the Krusty Krab. Squidward explained 3 signs that warned of the slasher's arrival. First, the lights would flicker on and off. Second, the phone would ring with nobody on the other end. Third, the ghost would arrive on the bus that killed him. SpongeBob was terrified. Squidward laughed and told him the story was fake. But then the 3 signs started happening. The lights flickered. The phone rang with no one there. A bus arrived even though buses did not run at night. Both SpongeBob and Squidward panicked. The scary atmosphere built throughout the episode. When a shadowy figure approached the restaurant wielding a spatula, both characters screamed and prepared for the worst. The tension was genuine despite the comedic tone. Then the reveal. The figure was just a nervous fish trying to apply for a job at the Krusty Krab. He had been trying to get hired for years, but kept arriving at the wrong times. The spatula was for his application. The phone calls were him trying to call ahead. Everything had a logical explanation. SpongeBob asked about the flickering lights. If the applicant explained the phone and the bus, who was flickering the lights? The episode cut to a live-action clip from the 1922 German expressionist horror film Noseratu. Count Orlok, played by actor Max Schreck, stood next to a light switch. He was filmed in the original black and white, creating jarring contrast with the colorful cartoon world. He flipped the switch up and down, making the lights flicker. The camera held on him for exactly 3 seconds. Then the episode ended. No explanation was given. No character mentioned Nosferatu. The joke existed purely as a visual non sequitur. For children watching in 2001, this was random and therefore funny. A weird old movie vampire appeared and flipped a light switch. The randomness itself was the humor. But for adults, especially adults with knowledge of film history, the reference was sophisticated and deliberate. Nosferatu was one of the most important horror films ever made. Released in 1922, it was an unauthorized adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula novel. The film could not use the Dracula name due to copyright issues, so they changed character names and some plot details. The resulting film became a masterpiece of German expressionist cinema, influencing every vampire movie that came after. Count Orlok's appearance was iconic in film history. Max Schreck's gaunt, rat-like vampire with pointed ears and bald head became the visual template for monstrous vampires, contrasting with later romantic vampire depictions. The film's shadow work and atmospheric horror influenced generations of filmmakers. Hillenberg included this reference because he knew film history. His education at California Institute of the Arts exposed him to classic cinema. His mentor, Jules Engel, emphasized understanding artistic traditions. Hillenberg absorbed these lessons and embedded them into SpongeBob, creating a children's cartoon that referenced 1920s German expressionist horror. The joke worked on multiple levels simultaneously. Children got absurdist randomness. Film students got a sophisticated reference. Horror fans got an unexpected crossover. Everyone found it funny for different reasons. This was multi-generational architecture applied to cultural education. What nobody expected was the long-term impact. Children who watched Graveyard Shift in 2001 at age 7 had no idea what Nosferatu was. but they remembered the image. The bald vampire flipping the light switch stayed in their minds as part of SpongeBob's world. Years later, when these children became teenagers and adults, they encountered references to Nosferatu in other contexts. They saw the original film. They learned about German expressionist cinema. They discovered horror film history, and they realized they had been introduced to this cultural touchstone by a SpongeBob episode they watched as children. The impact became measurable. In 2024, director Robert Eggers released a new remake of Nosferatu. Multiple articles about the film mentioned SpongeBob explicitly. Eggers himself credited SpongeBob with introducing Generation Z to the Nosferatu character, creating interest in his remake among young audiences who otherwise would have no familiarity with a 1920s silent horror film. A 3-second joke in a 2001 cartoon had direct cultural impact 23 years later. This demonstrated SpongeBob's function as cultural educator. The show taught film history to children who were not trying to learn anything. They absorbed the information unconsciously through repeated exposure to references they found funny. This pattern repeated throughout the series with different references. Hillenberg's love of Laurel and Hardy influenced the entire show's comedic structure. SpongeBob and Patrick's relationship directly mirrored Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy's classic innocent and companion dynamic. SpongeBob was Laurel, naive, optimistic, causing chaos through innocent actions. Patrick was Hardy, dumb but loyal, following along with SpongeBob's schemes. Children watching SpongeBob absorbed this comedy style without knowing its origin. They learned that an innocent character paired with a stupid character created specific types of humor. They internalized timing and physical comedy structures that came from the 1930s silent film traditions. When they later encountered actual Laurel and Hardy films, they recognized the style even if they could not name why it felt familiar. The show included countless small references to animation history. Visual compositions echoed classic cartoons from the 1940s and 1950s. Character designs drew from different animation traditions. The use of painted backgrounds referenced theatrical animation techniques from earlier eras. None of this was explained or announced. It simply existed in the show's visual language. Music choices also functioned as education. The show's soundtrack included Hawaiian music, surf rock, and maritime-themed songs that introduced children to musical styles they might never encounter otherwise. The specific instrumentation, steel guitar, ukulele, accordion, became associated with SpongeBob, but came from real musical traditions. The Sweet Victory song from band Geeks introduced children to the power ballad format. The song was performed genuinely, not ironically. It demonstrated how music could create emotional impact in storytelling. Children absorbed this lesson about music's narrative function without realizing they were learning about compositional techniques. The show also taught about theater and performance through episodes where characters put on shows or performances. These episodes demonstrated concepts like stage fright, audience reaction, rehearsal process, and the gap between planning and execution. Children learned how performance worked through watching cartoon characters navigate these situations. The education extended to marine biology, though less obviously than other areas. Hillenberg's background as marine biology teacher influenced how sea creatures were portrayed. While the show took enormous liberties with reality, fire burning underwater, for example, actual marine life facts appeared regularly. Sponges being absorbent and flexible, starfish having no brain, crabs being obsessed with food. These traits were exaggerated, but rooted in real biology. Children learned to identify sea creatures through character associations. They knew what a sea sponge was because of SpongeBob. They knew what starfish looked like because of Patrick. They learned about squids, crabs, whales, and countless other ocean species through character designs based on actual animals. This was not rigorous science education, but it created baseline familiarity with marine life that many children lacked. The show taught that learning could be entertaining. Facts and references appeared in funny contexts, demonstrating that knowledge was not boring or separate from fun. This lesson influenced how Generation Z approached education generally. They expected learning to be engaging. They looked for entertainment value in educational content. They rejected the idea that serious topics required serious, dry presentation. This expectation came partially from growing up with SpongeBob, showing them that a children's cartoon could reference German expressionist cinema while making fart jokes. Sophisticated and silly were not opposites. You could learn about film history from the same episode where someone's pants ripped. The cultural literacy education was completely accidental from the viewer's perspective, but intentional from the creator's perspective. Hillenberg did not set out to teach children about Noseratu. He included the reference because it was funny to him and his adult writing staff. But the effect was the same. Millions of children got exposed to cultural references they had no other access to. This created a specific type of cultural knowledge in Generation Z. They knew random facts about things they had no reason to know. They recognized references to old movies they had never seen. They understood comedy styles from eras before they were born. All because SpongeBob included these elements and they absorbed them through osmosis. When this generation started creating internet content, they naturally included the same type of unexpected cultural references. Memes would reference old films, classical art, historical events, or obscure music. Not because creators were trying to be educational, but because SpongeBob had taught them that mixing high and low culture was funny. A meme could reference Renaissance paintings and fart jokes in the same image because SpongeBob proved this combination worked. The Noseratu effect was about showing that cultural education could happen invisibly through entertainment. Children did not need to study film history in school if their cartoons included film history naturally. They could learn through exposure rather than formal instruction. This changed how Generation Z thought about knowledge acquisition and cultural literacy. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. But this cultural education worked because SpongeBob was not just a random collection of references. The show created a consistent world with recurring characters and situations that audiences returned to repeatedly. This consistency created something television had rarely achieved before: a shared cultural experience that defined an entire generation's childhood, becoming the last true monoculture in an increasingly fragmented media landscape. Section 10. Shared monoculture in fragmented era. The cultural education mattered because everyone received it. This was the crucial difference between SpongeBob and almost everything that came after. SpongeBob was not just popular, it was universal. For people born between roughly 1990 and 2010, SpongeBob was the shared experience that everyone could reference, everyone remembered, and everyone felt connected to. This universality made it the last true monoculture for an entire generation. Monoculture means a cultural product that nearly everyone in a society consumes and can reference. Before media fragmentation, monoculture was common. In the 1950s and 1960s, families watched the same television shows because there were only 3 channels. Everyone saw the same movies because theaters showed limited releases. Everyone heard the same songs because radio stations played from a small pool of hits. Shared cultural experiences were the default. This started changing in the 1980s and accelerated through the 1990s. Cable television created hundreds of channels. Video stores let people watch movies on their own schedules. The internet began offering unlimited content options. Media was fragmenting, but the fragmentation was still incomplete when SpongeBob premiered in 1999. Children in 1999 still watched television on a schedule. They came home from school and turned on Nickelodeon. Whatever was playing is what they watched. There was no streaming service offering unlimited options. There was no YouTube with millions of videos. There was no TikTok with endless scrolling. Television was still the primary entertainment medium, and television still created shared viewing experiences. SpongeBob dominated Nickelodeon's schedule from its premiere onward. The show was not just successful, it was the highest-rated program on the network continuously for years. Nickelodeon responded to this success by airing SpongeBob constantly. Morning blocks, after-school blocks, evening programming, weekend marathons. If you turned on Nickelodeon at any random time, SpongeBob was likely playing. This constant presence meant exposure was nearly universal. Children who actively sought out SpongeBob watched it. Children who just turned on the television and watched whatever appeared also saw SpongeBob. Children whose parents put on Nickelodeon to keep them occupied encountered SpongeBob. Children visiting friends' houses saw SpongeBob. The show was unavoidable if you were a child with access to cable television between 1999 and 2010. This created a shared vocabulary that defined the generation. A person could reference SpongeBob to any peer and expect recognition. Is mayonnaise an instrument? I'm ready. The inner machinations of my mind are an enigma. These phrases needed no explanation. Everyone knew them. Everyone got the reference. This shared knowledge created instant connection between strangers. One research article noted, unlike Among Us posts or other current memes, SpongeBob was a shared experience for most kids around the country. Not everyone has watched The Mandalorian, and not everyone follows US politics, but you can be sure that everyone watched SpongeBob growing up. This universality was rare even when SpongeBob premiered. Other popular shows from the same era had dedicated audiences, but not universal penetration. Rugrats was popular, but not everyone watched it. The Powerpuff Girls had fans, but not everyone was a fan. Pokémon was huge, but some kids never got into it. SpongeBob was different. SpongeBob was mandatory cultural knowledge for anyone born in the right time frame. The research emphasized this point repeatedly. One article stated, "There's now a generation that would recognize SpongeBob at a higher rate than Mickey Mouse." Another noted, "This MFer lives in a pineapple under the sea," was the one agreed upon monoculture for younger generations. Multiple sources confirmed that SpongeBob was the unifying cultural touchstone when nothing else was. This universality created specific social functions. SpongeBob references became a way to identify your generation. If someone did not get a SpongeBob reference, they were either too old or too young to be part of your peer group. The references functioned as generational markers, instantly placing people in specific age brackets. SpongeBob quotes also functioned as social bonding. When meeting new people, discovering shared love of SpongeBob created immediate connection. Quoting favorite episodes together built rapport. Debating best episodes sparked friendly arguments that strengthened relationships. The shared experience provided common ground even between people with otherwise different backgrounds and interests. One anecdote captured this perfectly. An article about SpongeBob meme creators described a woman having dinner with her fiancé. She mentioned to their server that she helped run a large SpongeBob memes Facebook group. The server immediately recognized the group. The woman recalled, "It was such a genuine reaction from both of us. It put a smile on my face. At that moment, I realized the impact Mary and I had made by creating a space where everyone can share their humor." This random encounter between strangers connected through SpongeBob demonstrated the show's social function. It was not just entertainment. It was shared cultural infrastructure that allowed people to find each other and bond over common experience. The universality also meant SpongeBob references could travel across social boundaries. Different friend groups watched different shows. Different communities had different cultural preferences. But SpongeBob crossed all these boundaries. Rich kids and poor kids both watched SpongeBob. Urban and rural children both knew the episodes. Different racial and ethnic groups all had SpongeBob as common reference point. The show created unity across divisions that otherwise separated people. This unifying function became more valuable as media fragmented. By the 2000s, true monoculture had become nearly impossible. Streaming services offered unlimited content options. YouTube provided millions of videos. Social media algorithms showed different content to different users. Two people the same age could have completely different media diets with no overlap. But they both knew SpongeBob. The show functioned as cultural anchor in an increasingly fragmented landscape. No matter how different people's current media consumption was, they shared SpongeBob as foundation. They could always return to SpongeBob references as common language when nothing else connected them. Research noted this explicitly. The only pop culture that remains? SpongeBob. SpongeBob never goes anywhere. The article contrasted SpongeBob's permanence with TikTok trends that dominated for 2 weeks, then vanished. Other content came and went. SpongeBob stayed. This permanence came partly from SpongeBob being finished before fragmentation became total. People watched the Golden Age episodes during television's final era of shared viewing. They all saw the same content at roughly the same time in their development. This created synchronicity that later shows could not replicate. A show premiering in 2015 might be popular, but it competed with unlimited other options. Some people watched it. Others watched different shows. Others watched YouTube instead of television. Others spent time on social media rather than watching video content at all. No single show could achieve the universal penetration SpongeBob had, because the media environment no longer forced shared viewing. SpongeBob was also permanent because it defined childhood for an entire generation. The years between ages 5 and 15 are formative for cultural imprinting. Whatever media dominates during this period stays with people for life. For millennials born 1981 to 1996, this was shows like The Simpsons, Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, or Friends. For Gen Z, born 1997 to 2012, this was SpongeBob. The show aired during the exact right window to capture this generation's formative years. Someone born in 1997 was 2 years old when SpongeBob premiered, and 17 when the show passed its golden age. Someone born in 2005 was -6 when it premiered, but grew up watching constant reruns of Golden Age episodes. The show's long run and constant rebroadcasting meant it touched multiple age cohorts within the generation. This created something unusual, a shared cultural experience across a wide age range. Normally, 5-year age gaps meant different cultural references, but SpongeBob bridged these gaps. A person born in 1995 and a person born in 2005 both had SpongeBob as core childhood memory. They watched different episodes in real time, but encountered the same Golden Age content through reruns. This created unusual generational cohesion. The universality also meant SpongeBob nostalgia was collective rather than individual. When people felt nostalgic for SpongeBob, they were not alone in that feeling. Millions of others shared the same nostalgia simultaneously. This collective nostalgia became self-reinforcing. The more people referenced SpongeBob nostalgically, the more others joined in, creating waves of renewed interest. Every few years, SpongeBob would experience a nostalgia surge. New meme formats would emerge. Old episodes would get rediscovered. Social media would fill with SpongeBob content. These surges happened because the collective memory was so strong. Enough people remembered it once to create momentum. Compare this to other childhood shows that people remembered individually. You might feel nostalgic for some obscure cartoon you watched, but if you mentioned it, peers might not remember or might never have seen it. Your nostalgia was personal, not shared. With SpongeBob, nostalgia was guaranteed to be collective. Everyone remembered. Everyone could participate. The monoculture status also meant SpongeBob could serve as shorthand for an entire generational experience. When articles discussed Gen Z humor or childhood, SpongeBob appeared repeatedly as the defining reference. The show represented more than just itself. It represented a specific time period, a specific childhood experience, a specific cultural moment. This symbolic function gave SpongeBob lasting relevance beyond its content. Even people who did not particularly love the show still recognized its cultural importance. Even people who preferred other cartoons acknowledged SpongeBob's dominant position. The show transcended individual taste to become generational touchstone. But monoculture status created pressure. Being the shared reference point meant the show carried weight beyond normal entertainment. When Steven Hillenberg died, the collective grief was intense because SpongeBob was not just a show he created. It was the foundation of an entire generation's shared culture. Losing Hillenberg felt like losing a piece of collective childhood. The petition for sweet victory at the Super Bowl demonstrated this. Over 1 million signatures represented people feeling that SpongeBob deserved recognition at America's biggest cultural event. They wanted their shared experience validated on the largest possible stage. The NFL's failure to properly honor this request felt like dismissing an entire generation's cultural foundation. SpongeBob's monoculture status also meant it became the reference point against which all other children's content was measured. New cartoons were compared to SpongeBob. Could they achieve the same universal appeal? Would they become the next generation's shared experience? Usually the answer was no, because the fragmented media environment made monoculture nearly impossible. This meant SpongeBob was not just the last monoculture, it was probably the last possible monoculture. Media had fragmented too much for any single piece of content to achieve that level of universal penetration again. Children growing up after 2010 had no equivalent shared experience. They had individual favorites, but no collective touchstone everyone knew. This made SpongeBob precious. It represented something that could not be recreated. A moment when everyone watched the same thing and built shared cultural vocabulary from it. The universality created community. The shared references created connection. The collective memory created belonging. And this universality meant that when the show taught lessons about humor, character, and life, those lessons reached everyone. The 3 pillars of absurdism, irony, and weaponized innocence, were not absorbed by some viewers. They were absorbed by an entire generation. The blueprint for Gen Z humor spread universally because the show teaching it was universally watched. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. But universal exposure created another phenomenon nobody predicted. As this generation aged, their relationship with SpongeBob's characters changed dramatically. The character they identified with shifted based on life experience. And this character progression, from SpongeBob to Patrick to Squidward, became one of the most discussed aspects of the show's long-term cultural impact, revealing how perfectly the show had captured different life stages in its core cast. Section 11. The Squidward Maturation Arc. The monoculture status meant everyone watched SpongeBob. But something stranger happened as that generation aged. Their relationship with the show changed completely, not because the show changed, but because they changed. The character they identified with shifted as they moved through different life stages. This progression became so common that it turned into a shared generational realization. Everyone eventually became Squidward. The pattern was remarkably consistent. Children watching SpongeBob between ages 5 and 10 identified with SpongeBob himself. He was the protagonist. He was energetic and optimistic. He got excited about everything. He saw work as an adventure and life as full of possibilities. Children related to this energy because they felt the same way. Everything was new. Everything was interesting. The world was exciting. SpongeBob's enthusiasm matched childhood perspective perfectly. Going to school was something to be excited about. Chores could be turned into games. Boring tasks became fun through attitude alone. SpongeBob demonstrated that choosing to be happy made you happy. Children accepted this lesson because they had not yet encountered circumstances that could not be overcome through optimism. The character also appealed to children because adults often told them to be more like SpongeBob. Be enthusiastic, be positive, be helpful, work hard, stay cheerful. These were the values adults explicitly tried to teach. SpongeBob embodied all of them. Identifying with SpongeBob meant being a good kid who adults approved of. Then viewers hit their teenage years, roughly 13 to 18. SpongeBob suddenly seemed annoying. His constant energy felt exhausting. His optimism seemed naive. His enthusiasm for work looked like he was being exploited and did not realize it. The character who seemed admirable at age 7 looked pathetic at age 15. During these teenage years, identification shifted to Patrick. Patrick did not care about anything. He lived under a rock with no job, no responsibilities, no ambitions. He spent his days doing whatever he wanted. He was too stupid to worry about the future. He had no anxiety because he barely had thoughts. Teenagers found this aspirational for obvious reasons. They were starting to feel pressure about their futures. Parents, teachers, and society demanded they plan their careers, prepare for college, and take life seriously. The pressure was constant and stressful. Patrick represented escape from all that pressure. He had achieved what seemed impossible: complete freedom from expectations. Patrick's stupidity became a feature, not a bug. Being dumb meant not understanding why you should be stressed. Not knowing things meant not having to deal with complex problems. Patrick's ignorance was bliss in the most literal sense. Teenagers watching Patrick saw someone who had accidentally achieved what they desperately wanted: peace through disconnection. The character's friendship with SpongeBob also appealed to teenagers. Patrick was loyal without being demanding. He went along with SpongeBob's schemes without questioning them. He provided companionship without expectations. This was ideal friendship from a teenage perspective. Someone to hang out with who never judged you or pushed you to be better. But Patrick identification was temporary. As viewers moved into their 20s, Patrick stopped being relatable. His complete lack of ambition started seeming less like freedom and more like wasted potential. His stupidity stopped being funny and started being frustrating. The character who represented escape now represented the consequences of never growing up. This was when the final shift happened. This was when they became Squidward. The Squidward shift usually occurred between ages 22 and 27. This was when people entered the real working world. They took jobs they did not particularly want because they needed money. They worked for bosses who cared more about profit than employee well-being. They dealt with coworkers whose personalities they had not chosen. They came home exhausted and tried to pursue hobbies or passions but had no energy left. Suddenly, Squidward made perfect sense. His grumpiness was not meanness, it was exhaustion. His frustration with SpongeBob was not cruelty. It was the reaction of someone who was tired being confronted with someone who was not. His cynicism about work was not negativity. It was realism about what labor actually involved. His failed artistic ambitions were not jokes. They were the gap between who you wanted to be and who your circumstances allowed you to be. Every aspect of Squidward that seemed villainous in childhood became completely understandable in adulthood. He was not the antagonist. He was the protagonist of his own story, and his story was about being trapped. The character's daily routine mirrored many viewers' lives exactly. Wake up, go to job you hate, deal with annoying people, come home, try to do something you actually care about, fail because you are too tired, go to sleep, repeat. This was Squidward's life. This was also the life of millions of people working service jobs, office jobs, any job that paid bills but did not fulfill dreams. Squidward's suffering became funny in a new way, not because he deserved it, but because it was relatable. When SpongeBob and Patrick bothered him on his day off, viewers understood his rage. They had experienced the same thing. When Mr. Krabs exploited his labor, viewers recognized their own employers. When Squidward tried to enjoy high culture and nobody understood, viewers felt their own isolation. One research article explicitly discussed this shift. As a child, I had SpongeBob's perspective on the world, happy to go to school, to play with my cousin who lived across the street, and to learn about new things. Now I am Squidward, not because I hate my life or because I hate my work, but because I no longer see the way the world could be. I see it as it is. This quote captured the transformation perfectly. The shift to Squidward was not about becoming mean or cynical. It was about seeing reality clearly. Children saw potential. Adults saw what actually existed. Squidward represented that clear-eyed view of how the world actually functioned, rather than how it should function. The becoming Squidward phenomenon became such a common discussion topic that it appeared in countless articles, Reddit threads, and social media posts. People shared their Squidward realization moments. They posted memes about the character evolution. They joked about checking their birth certificate to see if they were secretly Squidward all along. This collective realization created a new appreciation for the character. Viewers went back and rewatched episodes they remembered from childhood. They noticed things they had missed. Squidward was not unreasonably grumpy. SpongeBob genuinely was annoying. Patrick actually was inconsiderate. Squidward's reactions were completely justified given his circumstances. One article noted, "Squidward is the most relatable and human SpongeBob character of them all. SpongeBob was always in an upbeat mood. Good for him, but that would be exhausting on a daily basis." And Squidward was constantly dealing with the conflicting emotions of hanging outside with an annoying duo or staying at home playing his clarinet. The writer continued, "Sometimes Squidward wanted to be left alone. Other times he was lonely and felt alienated. Sometimes that itself was a conflict. From one introvert to another, there is something deeply moving about Squidward's whole deal." This deeper understanding of Squidward revealed something about how the show was constructed. Hillenberg and his writers had created characters that represented different life perspectives simultaneously. SpongeBob was childhood innocence. Patrick was teenage carelessness. Squidward was adult reality. All three existed in the same show, allowing different viewers to identify with different characters based on their own life stage. This was sophisticated character design hidden inside a children's cartoon. The show was not just entertaining kids, it was creating characters that would remain relevant as those kids grew up. The writers understood that a 7-year-old would become a 17-year-old, would become a 27-year-old. They built the cast to speak to all three ages. The Squidward progression also demonstrated why the show maintained relevance across decades. It was not just nostalgic comfort viewing. It was a text that matured with its audience. The episodes did not change, but viewers understood them differently at different ages. This kept the show fresh despite being decades old. The character progression revealed that SpongeBob had accidentally created a coming-of-age narrative told through shifting identification. You started as SpongeBob, full of hope and energy. You passed through Patrick, seeking escape from pressure. You ended as Squidward, trapped by circumstances and trying to maintain dignity anyway. This was a story about growing up, told not through plot, but through which character you related to. The progression was also a commentary on what society did to people. Everyone started optimistic like SpongeBob. Life and work ground that optimism down until you became Squidward. The show never said this explicitly, but the character evolution implied it. The world turned SpongeBobs into Squidwards through exploitation, disappointment, and exhaustion. But the show offered something important through this progression. It showed that being Squidward was okay. The character was not a failure or a villain. He was someone trying to maintain some dignity and pursue some meaning in circumstances designed to crush both. He kept playing clarinet even though he was bad at it. He kept painting even though no one appreciated his art. He kept trying even though he kept failing. This persistence was quietly heroic. Squidward never gave up completely. He never stopped wanting better, even though better never came. Viewers who had become Squidward saw this and recognized their own refusal to surrender. They were still here. They were still trying. They were Squidward, and Squidward kept going. The maturation arc demonstrated the show's lasting power. It was not just a childhood memory. It was a mirror that showed you who you were at different life stages. The fact that this progression was so universal proved the show had captured something true about how life changed people. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. But this character evolution was only possible because the show stayed in cultural circulation. Other childhood shows faded when their original audience grew up. SpongeBob remained present and relevant, constantly discussed and referenced. This permanence distinguished it from every other piece of children's media from its era and raised a crucial question. Why did SpongeBob survive when countless other trends, memes, and cultural moments vanished within weeks or months? Section 12. Why it survives when trends die. The Squidward maturation arc explained why individuals kept returning to SpongeBob. But individual nostalgia alone does not explain cultural dominance. Plenty of shows from the late 1990s and early 2000s inspired nostalgia without maintaining active relevance. People remembered them fondly, but did not reference them constantly. They were finished chapters, not ongoing conversations. SpongeBob was different. SpongeBob never faded. 25 years after its premiere, the show remains central to internet humor and cultural discourse in ways that seem to defy normal content life cycles. Understanding this survival requires comparing SpongeBob to how modern internet culture actually functions. The internet moves fast. Trends emerge, dominate completely, then vanish within days or weeks. A TikTok sound goes viral. Everyone uses it. Millions of videos deploy the same audio in different contexts. Then it disappears. 2 weeks later, a new sound takes its place. The old sound is forgotten, archived in TikTok's history, but no longer culturally relevant. This rapid cycling defines modern internet culture. Memes have shorter lifespans than ever. A format emerges on Twitter. It spreads to Instagram. It reaches Facebook. By the time it hits Facebook, it is already dead on Twitter. The platforms feed on novelty. Algorithms reward fresh content. Users scroll endlessly looking for something they have not seen yet. This creates pressure for constant turnover. Research documented this explicitly. One article stated, "Internet comedy now takes the niche and exposes it at every level, memes it up, spits it out, and moves on to the next thing." TikTok trends take over everyone's speech and posting patterns for an average of 2 weeks until it no longer feels very demure. Then we're on to the next thing. The article continued with the crucial observation. The only pop culture that remains? SpongeBob. SpongeBob never goes anywhere. This permanence was not normal. It violated the rules of internet culture. SpongeBob should have had its moment and faded like everything else. A wave of nostalgia in the mid-2000s should have been its peak. The memes should have exhausted themselves. New shows with newer references should have replaced it. But none of this happened. SpongeBob remained constant while everything else cycled. The survival came from multiple factors working together. The first was structural timelessness. Hillenberg deliberately avoided pop culture references that would date the content. Episodes from 2001 did not reference celebrities, news events, or trends from 2001. The humor came from character and situation, which were universal and unchanging. This meant SpongeBob episodes never felt old. A person watching Geeks for the first time in 2025 would not notice it was made in 2001 unless they looked up the air date. The animation style was consistent with later seasons. The jokes worked using the same logic as modern comedy. The situations were relatable, regardless of when they were created. The episode existed outside time in a way most content could not achieve. Compare this to shows that did rely on contemporary references. Those shows were hilarious when they aired, but became historical documents over time. You could watch them and enjoy them, but you were watching a snapshot of a specific moment. SpongeBob episodes were not snapshots. They were ongoing, present tense. This timelessness meant they never stopped being relevant. The second factor was emotional versatility. SpongeBob memes could express any emotion or situation. Need to express exhaustion? Tired SpongeBob. Need to show surprise? Surprised Patrick. Need to convey mockery? Mocking SpongeBob. Need to illustrate conflicted feelings? Squidward looking out window. The show provided a complete emotional vocabulary that covered nearly any communicative need. This versatility meant SpongeBob remained useful. Other meme formats were specific. They expressed one emotion or represented one situation. Once that situation was no longer relevant, the meme died. But SpongeBob formats could be applied to whatever situations were currently relevant. The same image could be used in 2010 and 2025, with different captions addressing different current events. The memes evolved with culture without needing new source material. A Squidward image from 2001 could comment on 2025 situations because the character's expression was universally applicable. This adaptability gave SpongeBob infinite shelf life. As long as humans experienced emotions and situations, SpongeBob images could represent those experiences. The third factor was generational investment. The generation that grew up with SpongeBob was now creating the internet content that defined online culture. They were writing articles, making videos, designing memes, building platforms. Their creative output naturally reflected the comedy that shaped them. Using SpongeBob was not just nostalgia. It was using the native language they had learned as children. This meant SpongeBob content kept appearing because the people creating content thought in SpongeBob terms. When they wanted to express an idea humorously, they instinctively reached for SpongeBob references, because that was how their brains structured humor. The show had embedded itself so deeply that using it was automatic rather than deliberate. As this generation aged into positions of influence, SpongeBob references appeared in increasingly mainstream contexts. Professional articles referenced SpongeBob. Marketing campaigns used SpongeBob formats. Corporate social media accounts posted SpongeBob memes. The references moved from niche internet spaces to general culture because the people running general culture were the people who grew up with SpongeBob. The fourth factor was continued production. The show never stopped airing. New episodes kept appearing, though fans debated their quality compared to the Golden Age. This ongoing production meant SpongeBob remained an active show rather than a finished artifact. It was not a relic from the past. It was current content that happened to have a long history. This active status kept SpongeBob in cultural circulation. The show appeared in TV listings. New episodes were marketed. Parents put on SpongeBob for their children, introducing a new generation to the content. This multi-generational viewing created layered familiarity. Adults knew SpongeBob from their childhood. Their children knew SpongeBob from current viewing. This overlap kept the show present rather than purely nostalgic. The fifth factor was meme format diversity. SpongeBob did not have one meme format. It had hundreds. This diversity meant that when one format got overused and tired, another format could emerge. The well never ran dry because the show had produced so much content across so many seasons and animation styles. New SpongeBob meme formats kept appearing years after the Golden Age ended. The FreakBob meme emerged in 2023, 24 years after the show premiered. This demonstrated that people were still mining SpongeBob content for new material. The show was not exhausted. It was an ongoing resource that kept providing. This contrasted sharply with other nostalgic properties. Those had one or two meme formats that got used extensively, then faded. SpongeBob had unlimited formats because it had hundreds of episodes with thousands of distinct images and quotes. The sheer volume of content meant new discoveries kept happening. The sixth factor was cross-platform dominance. SpongeBob was not big on one platform. It was big on every platform. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Reddit, TikTok, YouTube. SpongeBob content thrived everywhere. This omnipresence created self-reinforcing relevance. You could not avoid SpongeBob online. It appeared in your feeds constantly, regardless of which platform you used. This cross-platform presence meant SpongeBob survived platform changes. When users migrated from Facebook to Instagram, SpongeBob came with them. When TikTok emerged, SpongeBob content immediately appeared there too. The show was not tied to any single platform's lifecycle. It existed across all platforms simultaneously, making it immune to individual platform decline. The seventh factor was the three-pillar structure. Absurdism, irony, and weaponized innocence remained relevant comedy approaches. These were not trends that went out of style. They were fundamental comedy techniques that worked across eras. SpongeBob had taught these techniques so effectively that they became the baseline for how an entire generation created humor. When that generation kept using absurdist, ironic, and innocent humor approaches in their own content, they were essentially recreating SpongeBob without SpongeBob. But using actual SpongeBob images made the references stronger because everyone recognized them. The show had become both the teacher and the textbook for modern comedy. This meant SpongeBob's survival was not about the show itself staying relevant. It was about the comedy principles the show represented staying relevant. As long as people created humor using absurdism, irony, and innocent imagery, SpongeBob remained the perfect visual representation of those approaches. The eighth factor was emotional authenticity. Despite being a cartoon about talking sea creatures, SpongeBob expressed genuine emotions that people actually felt. The show never talked down to its audience or dismissed feelings as unimportant. Squidward's suffering was real suffering. SpongeBob's joy was real joy. Patrick's confusion was real confusion. This authenticity created lasting connection. People returned to SpongeBob not just for humor, but for emotional expression. The show provided a vocabulary for feelings that was more accessible than trying to explain those feelings directly. Saying, "I feel like Squidward today," communicated a complex emotional state more efficiently than paragraphs of explanation. This emotional utility kept the show relevant as a communication tool. The ninth factor was quality versus quantity. The Golden Age episodes were genuinely excellent television. They were not just good for a kids' show or good for their time. They were objectively well-crafted comedy that held up against any standard. This quality meant people did not return to SpongeBob ironically or purely nostalgically. They returned because the content was actually good. This quality created credibility. People were not embarrassed to reference SpongeBob because SpongeBob was legitimately funny and smart. It was not a guilty pleasure. It was a genuine pleasure that happened to come from a children's cartoon. This cultural respect meant using SpongeBob references did not make you look childish. It made you look culturally literate. The 10th factor was adaptability to serious contexts. SpongeBob could be funny and also express genuine social commentary. The show's structure allowed it to address serious topics through humor. This versatility meant SpongeBob references appeared in discussions about labor rights, mental health, economic inequality, and other weighty subjects. When people discussed exploitation at work, they used Krusty Krab images. When they talked about depression, they used exhausted SpongeBob. When they examined cynicism, they referenced Squidward. The show provided visual language for serious discourse, not just entertainment. This expanded its utility far beyond comedy. All these factors combined to create something nearly unique in modern media. Evergreen content that never aged, never became irrelevant, never faded from culture. SpongeBob existed in permanent present tense. Always available, always applicable, always understood. The survival was remarkable because it should have been impossible. Everything dies in internet culture. Trends fade, memes expire, references become dated. But SpongeBob remained. 25 years of continuous cultural relevance. Generations connected through shared knowledge. Millions of memes created and shared. Constant presence across every platform. This permanence made SpongeBob more than just a successful TV show. It made it cultural infrastructure, a shared language, a common reference point, a way to communicate complex ideas simply, a connection between strangers, a comfort during difficult times, a source of humor that never ran dry. The show survived because it was not just one thing. It was simultaneously childhood comfort, sophisticated comedy, social commentary, emotional vocabulary, generational identifier, and comedy education. It served so many functions that it could never be replaced by any single piece of content. Other shows were funny. Other shows were nostalgic. Other shows influenced people. But no other show combined all these elements while reaching universal audience during the specific window when monoculture was still possible. SpongeBob was the right content at the right time, reaching the right audience in the right way. And that combination of factors created something that appeared permanent. As long as the generation shaped by SpongeBob remained culturally active, the show would remain relevant. As long as their children watched SpongeBob reruns, new generations would join the understanding. As long as the internet existed, SpongeBob memes would circulate. The survival was not guaranteed when the show premiered in 1999. It was the result of countless decisions, circumstances, and qualities aligning perfectly. Hillenberg's vision, the golden age formula, the three-pillar structure, the multi-generational architecture, the monoculture moment, the character progression, the emotional authenticity, the structural timelessness, all of it combined to create something that defied normal content life cycles. Something that survived when trends died. Something that remained when everything else faded. Something that defined an entire generation's sense of humor and continued defining it decades later. If you enjoyed this video essay, feel free to subscribe. I've got another deep dive coming soon. One insane theory for every SpongeBob character to fall asleep to. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.